Members of the committee, we are now live.
Meeting of the Committee of the Whole Community Development for Tuesday, August 11th is now in order. I would ask you to rise as you are able to for the reading of the invocation, please. As we come together today, we recognize the great responsibility laid upon us. Our council will always strive to understand the needs of the people we serve and to use power wisely and well. Our purpose is to establish and maintain a city of prosperity and righteousness where freedom prevails and where justice rules. Let us also not forget those who served our community and who are no longer with us so that we can continue to do the work we must in their memory. Please be seated. Deputy Clerk, please call the roll.
Councillor McCrory.
Here.
Councillor Antosky.
Here.
Councillor Carpenter.
Here.
Councillor Sless.
Present.
Councillor Vanderstelt.
Present.
Mayor Davis.
Present.
Councillor Utley.
Here.
Councillor Martin.
Here.
Councillor Wall.
Present.
Councillor Van Tilburg.
Present.
And Councillor Weaver.
Present. I would like to just remind the committee of our viewing public of a few procedural rules for our virtual meetings and operating as efficiently as possible. So first, all members will be muted for the meeting to reduce feedback. All web cameras for council members shall be turned on. Staff will be requested to join the video meeting should the need to answer questions of member of councils arise. Any member of council should indicate they wish to speak by pressing the raise hand button on the participation list screen, which is the bottom right-hand side. The clerk staff will lower the hand when you have been recognized by the chair for your speaking opportunity. In the event of a connection or service interruption occurs, that affects a quorum of the committee of the whole, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting will then be adjourned. All members of committee participating via online video conference will vote using the eScribe and the clerk will announce the vote results. Members of the public who registered as delegates or under the statutory public hearings are able to take part electronically via webcam or via the telephone for the meetings. All rules for delegations under the city's procedural bylaws continue to apply. So members of committee, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest on any of the items appearing on tonight's agenda? Okay, seeing none. At this time, all the items for consideration will automatically be separated as there are delegations for each of the 3 items we have before us. As a result, there is no need to move a motion to approve items not separated as all items are separated. So committee will now move into the statutory public hearing meeting, and that meeting will actually be chaired by Mayor Davis. So I'll relinquish the chair to Mayor Davis at this time.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Weaver. You're doing a fine job chairing so far. So, good evening, everyone. There's one public public meeting under the Planning Act on tonight's agenda. The public meeting is held in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. The purpose of the meeting is to discuss the planning application, to hear from the public either in support or against the application. At the end of the public meeting, the committee will then deal with a recommendation, which is generally considered for a final decision at the next meeting of council. The name of anyone who speaks in regard to any item tonight will appear within the meeting minutes. Anyone wishing notice of any further proceedings regarding the application should leave their name and address with the city clerk. The applicant, usual procedure is the applicant speaks first, followed by municipal staff and then the public. The applicant then has an opportunity to provide any clarification in respect to any questions or issues raised during the meeting. So one matter before us will now commence the public hearing. It concerns items 5.1. It's amendments to the City of Brantford zoning bylaw 16090 and County of Brant zoning bylaw 6116, respecting cannabis production and processing facilities, PZ-06-18. So I'll now ask the applicant or the agent, which is actually city staff because it's an application made by the city, to present to the committee. Don't forget to state your name, and then present us with your application. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Davis and members of committee. Joe Muto, Manager of Development Planning, Planning Department.
Hi, Bryn O'Neill with the Planning Department as well. So Mayor and members of council, this application is regarding cannabis production and processing facilities, and we originally had brought forward a report to council earlier this year in January. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the application is to amend the zoning bylaw, the city zoning bylaw 16090 and the county of Brant zoning bylaw 6116. This application is a city initiated application that applies to the entirety of the city. It is to provide clarity on cannabis production and processing facilities through regulations and a definition, and to prohibit the use in certain areas. Currently, cannabis production is permitted in the general industrial M2 zone and the agricultural and industrial zones within the annexed lands. Next slide. A staff report was originally brought to Committee of the Whole January 14th, 2020, which recommended a number of regulations, but did not include a separation distance between cannabis production and processing facilities and residential uses. The committee had concerns at this time and wanted consideration of a 400-meter separation distance. So the application was referred back to planning staff to allow for additional public consultation. Next slide. The current regulations for cannabis production under zoning bylaw 16090, as stated prior, they are permitted in all general industrial zones as the use is considered to be manufacturing and agricultural, both of which are permitted uses in the M2 zone. And under County of Brant zoning bylaw 6116, medical marijuana facilities are permitted in agricultural and industrial zones. Next slide. This map shows where cannabis production in some form is permitted currently in the city. This is the annex lands as well as the industrial area of the city. Next slide. So cannabis growing, processing, and consumption are all regulated through Health Canada, and any business or person wishing to establish a cannabis facility, not for personal use, must receive a license through Health Canada. And these licenses go through extensive review and have a variety of requirements, which include things such as security, quality control, and air purification. Next slide. There is also a different stream under Health Canada, which is medical cannabis registrations, which is where an individual can receive a prescription from their doctor to grow cannabis. And this person can grow a certain amount of prescribed cannabis in a location, and they just have to register that location with Health Canada. And up to 4 persons can grow in the same location. These facilities do not have any sort of requirements for air purification, garbage disposal, and they do not have to notify the city upon establishing their facility. These registrations are for personal medical use and are outside of the 4 permitted plants per household as well. There is no clear limitation on the number of plants permitted. It is solely based on the prescription. There is a limitation on possession of dried medical cannabis, however. Next slide. Cannabis is considered a crop under the Ontario Ministry of Agricultural, Food and Rural Affairs, and the Farming and Food Production Protection Act prohibits the restriction of crops through a zoning bylaw. So this means that cannabis can continue to be grown in agricultural areas regardless of what the zoning bylaw says. Next slide. So the proposed changes to the bylaw, the majority of the amendments were brought forward in the January report, which includes a definition, and then all cannabis production and processing facilities shall be enclosed in structures and which shall not include a greenhouse. Accessory retail will not be permitted, and there is certain areas in the city that it is proposed to be prohibited. Staff are also proposing the inclusion of a 70-meter separation distance to reflect medical cannabis registrations locating within industrial areas. And these facilities, as I said, do not have regulations associated with them. So the 70-meter separation distance we are proposing is based off of the provincial D6 guidelines, which, next slide. So the D6 guidelines are a Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks document, which is used province-wide to determine appropriate separation distances between industrial uses and sensitive land uses. These guidelines have been tested at the OMB and LPAT and have been upheld. They provide 3 different classes of industrial uses, and planning staff are of the opinion that cannabis production and processing facilities are consistent with a Class 2 use. And this is based off of Class 2 uses having frequent odor and occasionally intense odors. The graphic shown on this slide shows the graphic for Class 2 industrial uses, which proposes a minimum of 70 meters separation distance, and there is a 300-meter potential influence area. Next slide. This map identifies where planning staff proposed that cannabis production and processing facilities be permitted. The pink areas are industrial areas, and those are the areas that are proposing that it continue to be permitted. And the blue areas are industrial areas that would be subject to the 70-meter separation distance. Next slide. Proposed changes to the County of Brant 6116. We are recommending that cannabis production and processing facilities be prohibited as a use under this bylaw. However, this does, as noted before, this cannabis will still be permitted to be grown as a crop. Next slide. An additional public information center was held in March. After the report went back to committee in January, and the application also went to the Planning Advisory Committee where they voiced concerns with this 400-meter separation distance. The Planning Advisory Committee memo is attached to the report. Next slide. 8 members of the public were represented at the Public Information Center. 2 of these 2 cannabis facilities were represented, and the remainder were residents who had concerns with odor and proximity to residential uses. We have also received 1 letter and at this point over 40 emails regarding the cannabis production and processing facilities. 1 letter was from a proposed cannabis production and processing facility. They raised concerns with proposed separation distances. 2 emails were clarification, and upon this presentation, 33 were in support of the 400-meter separation distance. You should have also received additional emails under separate cover that are also in support of the 400-meter separation distance. The bulk of these emails, I will say, are all from the same neighborhood, which is the east end of the city in the area of Garden Ave. Next slide. So the following 4 slides, they are all showing maps with a variety of separation distances. These maps are for council's information. Although staff are recommending a 70-meter separation distance, these slides have been provided to show what larger separation distances would look like. So we have provided 100, 200, 300, and 400 meters. Obviously, this one is 100, and you can go to the next slide. This is 200, then 300, and then 400. So again, the blue area is what the properties that would be subject to the separation distance. Next slide. So in conclusion, planning staff recommend that zoning bylaw amendment PZ 0618 initiated by the city of Brantford regarding cannabis production and processing facilities be approved, as it is consistent with the PPS, conforms to the growth plan and the official plan, and represents good land use planning. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ms. O'Neill. So we've got a couple of councillors in the lineup here. Councillor Sluss for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I read in the report somewhere that staff, if there was an amendment made to make the separation 400 meters, that staff didn't feel they could defend that. And I think it was referred back to the provincial guidelines, but the provincial guidelines are simply that, are they not? Guidelines?
Through the chair, they are guidelines. However, they are the guidelines that have been used province-wide for this situation where industrial uses are their separation distances are proposed. They have been tested prior at the OMB and now the LPAT, and they have been upheld. So the 400 meters has no basis in any sort of guideline. So that is why we would have difficulty having any sort of support for that 400 meters.
Has 100 meters been tested?
Through the chair, so the guidelines themselves have been tested. So there's a variety of separation distances that are proposed. So for example, the class 2, 70 meters to 300 meters is what's proposed for a class 2 use. So those are what have been tested, those guidelines.
So nobody has put in a separation distance of 200 meters and it's been tested and defeated. Is that what you're saying?
Through the chair, I cannot speak to any decision specifically. I cannot say for sure whether there are specific setbacks or separation distances that have or have not. However, we are basing our separation distance off of a document that has been tested. So that is where we're coming from.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Antosky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see Joe Muto's hand up. Does he want to go ahead? I think he wanted to speak to that comment.
Joe, did you want to add anything to that Ms. O'Neill said?
Thank you, Councillor Antosky, and through the mayor. Just briefly with respect to response to Councillor Sless, is that this is really, in terms of cannabis production facilities, this is really new for a lot of municipalities. So in terms of providing any clarification on has that been tested at 100, 200, 300 meters, there's no recent case law or recent OMB decisions that I'm aware of that has tested the 100 meter rule versus 300 or 400 or 200. So I just wanted to provide that clarification to Councillor Sless.
Thank you, Mr. Muno. Back over to you, Councillor Antosky.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, Councillor Sless did ask my question about the guidelines. And the guidelines, Bryn, were 70 meters to 300 meters, right? So
That's correct.
why, looking at the chart, and it sets out all the different reasons something might be a class 2, so vibration or noise, and odor being one, and we recognize that there is potential for significant odor. Isn't that something that we might look at differently, since odor travels through the air, and you know, I guess noise does too, but it's a little bit different. I think 70 meters. Do you take each, does it have to fit all of those pieces in the chart, or do some have different weight in terms of deciding whether it's 70 or 300 or some other number?
Through the chair. So the guidelines, they provide as you know, a variety of different factors into the different classes, odor being one. And I cannot speak to how they factor in odor versus noise into the different classes. However, for the class 2 uses, they have identified that frequent and sometimes occasionally intense is what a class 2 use would be noted as. And so that is what's been considered within a class 2 use. So how odor travels rather than another thing, I think, has been factored into that. However, I mean, I'm not sure exactly the way they wrote the document, but it has been determined that odor, when it is frequent and occasionally intense, would be class 2.
Thanks, Bryn. And to the point about appeals and just there being testing, that's in regard to any M2 manufacturing. This is not specifically to cannabis. They've been challenged under different types of businesses. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's industrial uses altogether.
Right. So we have no idea at this point if it might be different. And did I hear you say that we had one letter from a manufacturer concerned about the distance? And that's the only thing we've heard from the manufacturing side at this point?
Through the chair, that's the only letter we received from a cannabis production facility. Yes, they are the one of two facilities that would be impacted by a 70-meter separation distance. We notified all facilities we are aware of, and there were a few questions, but no letters received other than the one we received. Yeah.
Thanks, Bryn. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And to Bryn or to Joe, looking in your report, one of the recommendations you're making is that cannabis production and processing would be prohibited within specific industrial areas of the city, primarily older industrial areas, which are often surrounded by established residential neighborhoods. So are you considering only older industrial areas that are surrounded by residential neighborhoods? What about, well, Bonita, for example, is an older industrial area. It's been there for well over 30 years. And it has residential in the neighborhood. So why is that not considered under the same realm as the older ones?
Through the chair. So when we were doing our initial analysis, we wanted to make sure that the use was only in industrial areas. So when looking at the map of our city, there is two clear industrial areas, one being in the west, one being in the east. And we proposed to prohibit the use in industrial buildings, not necessarily, not because of their age, but because of their location. So there are clear industrial properties that are completely surrounded by residential on all sides. And so we had proposed to remove the use from those areas because they are overall residential areas, and there just happens to be a few industrial uses interspersed, whereas the west and east industrial areas are overall industrial. And in terms of Bonita, that happens to be the edge of that larger industrial area to the east.
In the same report, you have you're talking about all of the facilities are located within the industrial areas, and you talk about 5 of them in the city of Brantford with very little complaints, and they're all fully enclosed. How is the one on Brock Street with broken windows in it and the neighbors complaining for blocks around, fully enclosed in a building?
Through the chair, so that one is not included in the 5 with no complaints. That is a separate facility. So the ones throughout the city that we have received no complaints on our commercial facilities, they are fully enclosed. However, the one that you are speaking to is under a medical registration. So there are no requirements in terms of Health Canada requirements for air filtration, and they are technically permitted to grow outdoors. So that is why we are proposing a separation distance.
And so your separation distance here, does it propose that they can grow outdoors on those properties as well?
We are, through the amendments we are proposing that growing can only occur indoors, whether it's a medical registration or a commercial facility.
And in your report, you also mentioned that the Brant County has a policy or bylaw in their planning that says 150 meters from any residential zone. Is that?
Through the chair, so that is, they have a variety of separation distances. That was a comment brought up by the Planning Advisory Committee. So one of them being 150. I can't speak to the details of that, but I believe that is from residential zones to an enclosed building.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, sorry, Councilor Carpenter. Mr. Mayor, did you want to add something to one of those answers? I see you've raised your hand.
Thank you, Mayor Davis, to Councillor Carpenter. I know there's going to be a lot of debate tonight about the distancing and where planning landed in terms of that 70 meters was made with good planning review and analysis. As we were aware previously or unaware previously about how some of these medical producers can co-grow together, that had obviously raised an issue with council and obviously planning staff. And we're recommending that 70-meter distance in the existing recommendation of the staff report in front of you this evening because there has been, with respect to the existing ones that Councillor Carpenter is now speaking to, have been no complaints save and except that Brock Street one. And then just to clarify Ms. O'Neill's response with respect to those existing older industrial areas. With this review, we've also kind of looked at what was going forward now in our new official plan, and those lands are, for lack of a better word, redundant in terms of industrial, in the sense that all the comprehensive review that has gone into the new official plan has basically said that those industrial areas are no longer utilized or should be utilized for industrial uses. And that's why the focus had been primarily on the industrial lands that are employment areas that are currently designated as identified in the mapping provided to you in the report and in the presentation this evening.
But in the presentation this evening, then, for example, that facility that's in Brock Street and Alice Street with the broken windows and the smell going around for blocks, that could actually exist then just next to the Belansky and the Live development within 70 meters, could it not?
Through the mayor to the councillor, that is correct. There would be a 70-meter separation distance from those residentially zoned properties to any proposed lot line of a future proposed cannabis production facility.
Well, the reason I raise this, because it also says in your report that all cannabis production and processing plant must be located within a fully enclosed structure and shall not be included in a greenhouse. I imagine the idea of not having it in a greenhouse and so the neighborhood doesn't have to smell it. Would that be correct?
That is correct. We have proposed to prohibit it in greenhouses due to the possibility of further odor. Yes.
But you're also in your report, it talks about Health Canada requiring that the municipality be notified of facilities, and that there's a strict Health Canada guidelines on the operators of such facilities. And yet when I complained in April about this facility on Brock Street, it seems that no one was notified in the city. I met with the police, they were not notified. And they're still, in fact, they were busted for growing too many, 3,600 plants, I believe, and they were still, after they were busted, they were still allowed to continue with, I think, 800 to 1,000 plants. So I'm just trying to wonder, I'm just don't have the confidence, and how can I have confidence that Health Canada is monitoring this when I see this kind of activity exist within residential neighborhoods in my ward, in our ward?
Through the chair. So as there are the two types of cannabis, there's the commercial, which they do have to notify the city when they establish a facility, and they do have rigorous requirements in terms of air filtration and other requirements. The facility you are speaking about is a combined medical registration. So a few people combined their medical registrations, which is basically they just have to get a prescription from the doctor, and they combined those to grow in the same location. So they do not have to notify the municipality under those Health Canada regulations. So there are two very different streams under Health Canada. There's the commercial, which is very rigorous, and then there is the medical, which is where there are more concerns and issues that come up.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I appreciate that, but I did notify Phil McColeman, our MPP, at this time. This is a place that had 3,600 plants. So in your report, you said only 4 could group them together. So 4 people were growing 3,600 plants for medical use. I just finding this hard to believe that can exist. And if they were growing them illegal because they were busted and 2,600 were taken out, how does someone keep their license when they've been busted like that? And not convicted, but they've been busted. It was made the papers, front page.
Through the chair, I cannot speak to how Health Canada allows or does not allow someone to continue with their license if they have had issues in the number of plants. I know that there's no restriction in terms of how many plants someone can have except for their prescription. So it's completely up to the doctor how much cannabis they are prescribing to someone.
So it's completely up to the doctor, same as the opioid prescriptions are. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll ask some questions later.
Councillor Vanderstel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If Joe, I don't know, I don't want to catch you off guard here, but if we take a bird's eye view of Brantford and we go up to the northwest, I believe that the setback for Ferrero is 1,000 meters. I seem to recall that at my first term of council. And that setback hopefully would be to mitigate some of the smells and noxious effects of hazelnuts, I think, right?
Through the mayor to Councillor Vanderstel. I'm not aware with respect to Ferrero what the overall minimum separation distance would be for that facility. We could do some additional analysis and provide you that feedback, Councillor, but I'm unaware at this point on the spot what the separation distance might be for that facility.
Okay, and through you, Mr. Mayor, to Joe as well. Are we factoring in what Councillor Carpenter was referring to as well, the increase in production? So when we know that within 70 meters or 200 meters or 400 meters that a company is going to set up shop, that they're not going to increase their production 100, 200, 300% of what they started with. So another 10 years from now, we could very well have production facilities pumping out an awful lot more product. So whatever number we pick tonight will be affected by how much product is being produced out of these facilities. I mean, if I were to run a business and I were to be successful at it, I would make sure that I want to use the entire footprint of whatever building I'm using. And I would want to make sure I'd maximize all the profits that I can realize from that space that I either own or rent. So it stands to reason that if the use increases, sales will increase, which means we're looking at increase in manufacturing wherever these companies tend to land, which means that the class 2, which was a recommended 300 over 70 meters, whatever is most appropriate in the circumstance, if we set it tonight, is it your understanding that we should set the bar a little bit higher because of the increased production?
Through the mayor to the councillor, ideally, there's only so much land, right? So with respect to increasing a separation distance or providing no separation distance at all is a matter of how much land is sterilized for that particular use, because if they can't meet the separation distances, they can't expand or develop. And as it's identified in the staff report, it does identify that if there's an existing facility to date, they can apply through an additional rezoning or minor variance, depending on the size or the reliefs being sought by that particular applicant, and then site plan control if they were going to expand. But if they exist before the decisions made today, and they're already licensed, and there's already that understanding that they have a business license and they're zoned for that use today, they would continue as legal non-conforming use for those existing facilities today.
Okay, I have no further questions, Mr. Mayor, but look forward to the debate.
Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in the presentation, it talked about the class 2 and the D6 zoning and how there's guidelines in place. How long have those guidelines been in place? Are they new based on the realities of cannabis production, or are they from 10, 20, 40 years ago?
Through the chair, they are quite old. They have not been updated in terms of cannabis production and processing facilities. They are 25 plus years old.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. And I'm just looking for some clarity. So if the county is putting some similar rules in place, they're going with 150. How does that, is that in alignment with any production that may abut our borders? Or is it going to be 150 from our borders? Because I know there are rules in place that doesn't allow neighboring municipalities to build on borders, but I mean, it's happened before with the county. So I'm just curious if what we adopt here, are we going to be adopting something tonight, but then if someone's living on the border of the city, they could have potentially something right beside them because it's in the county?
Through the chair, so that is a possibility in terms of their requirements, and our requirements do end at that boundary. I will note, however, that cannabis can be grown in any agricultural area regardless of what the zoning provisions say. So that is something that will be possible in both the county as well as the city on agricultural lands.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, Ms. O'Neill, I have a question for you about that chart. Where you said this is a class 2, you consider to be class 2 manufacturing, which is a distance of 70 meters. What is the maximum separation distance you can have according to that classification system, albeit for a different category?
So for class 2 is 300, but the maximum potential influence area is for class 3 is 1,000 meters, and that is a minimum 300 meter. Then that's for class 3, which is the highest.
Yeah, what would be a class 3 industry?
They provide a bunch of examples in the guidelines as well, and I can provide a few to you. It would be manufacturing of paint and varnish, organic chemical manufacturing, breweries, solvent recovery plants, soap and detergent manufacturing, metal manufacturing, manufacturing of resins and costing.
Okay, and this chart itself, like where does it come from? Who made the chart, and how did they make it?
It's a provincial, it's the province, so the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. It's guidelines that they produced quite a while ago for situations where there is sensitive land uses and industrial in the same area. I cannot speak to how it was produced. I do not know.
And did you say that the Ontario Municipal Board has relied upon that chart?
They have, yes.
Okay, all right. Councillor McCreary, then Councillor Antosky.
Mayor, thank you very much, through you to staff. Thanks for the presentation. When I look at the West End areas, we're obviously taking into account the zoning for new residential in the West End off of Hardy Road and Oak Park Road.
That is correct, yes.
With respect to the definitions, it says that the facility must be entirely enclosed, but does it permit the outdoor storage of waste plant material and waste soils?
Through the chair, yes, that would be permitted. The growing would have to take place indoors, but outdoor storage can occur if it's permitted in the zone.
So the really horrible smells will be allowed outdoors.
I cannot speak to if I guess the waste material has a larger odor than the production. My understanding is the harvesting is what has the largest odor, but they can store outdoors, yes.
Have we done this all from drawings, or did we do such a thing as a wind study?
Through the chair, we did not complete any sort of wind study, no.
Might that be a good idea? I know most days the wind blows from west to east across the front of my house. So, you know, I guess the West End boundary, sorry, the West End industrial areas might require a bigger, might really need the 400 meters, whereas some on the East End might not. I'm not sure how we make one solution fit all areas of town. We've clearly segregated out some of the older industrial areas, but you know, when I look at the impact of wind on some of this stuff, I've got to think that you know, maybe we need to do that. Could you comment on whether or not we should be doing a wind study?
Through the chair, that is something that I guess can be looked at. I don't know how that would impact the cannabis odor specifically. I don't know if, Joe, you have anything else to add to that, the possibility of a wind study.
Thanks, Bren. Through the mayor to Councillor McCreary. Good question. Wind does blow, but I think what we need to take into consideration here is that we have, as Ms. Bren had explained to Councillor Weaver, a 25-year-old bylaw which we're trying to modernize and address new provincial and federal policies that get dropped onto us the best we can by by creating separation distances, definitions, and all of the above that's identified in the staff report this evening. Wind was not considered when we did do our review, and I know that Ms. O'Neill did provide some case studies of other municipalities. In that review, I'm unaware of any other wind studies that were done. I would only highlight the fact that this is a city-driven initiative, and I don't know what a wind study would cost to I do that type of analysis. So that would be something for council to consider in that regard.
Councillor Carpenter has spoken about one circumstance in his ward where the odor is a problem from a marijuana producing company. And I think if Councillor Carpenter could tell you about another industrial site in his ward, which produces quite a foul odor from time to time within its generalized environment. And there's some evidence down in the Homedale as well about a couple of places that produce some local odors. And it all depends on where you are on any given day. But I think there's a world out there beyond the downward-looking plan view that we always do our planning in. And I just think that maybe we ought to be out in some of these neighborhoods and experience the odors that we get and where they arise and what it's like on a windy day. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, any other questions? Yes, Councillor Antosky, followed by Councillor Carpenter, then Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, I'll take the combined medical registration issue out of the mix, but we talked about the other 4 facilities that we've had no complaints from. But are they not all surrounded by other industrial uses?
The majority of them are located in, I guess, the interior of industrial areas. There are, I can think of one facility that is about 100 meters away, maybe 120 away from the closest residential, but there are none that are directly beside residential uses.
Okay, thank you. And we are prohibiting greenhouses because of the odor and trying to reduce that, but allowing storage. So I guess I'm wondering how that squares up.
So in terms of outdoor storage, the intent with permitting that is it's an industrial use, and where outdoor storage is currently permitted in industrial zones, we have not proposed to change that. The understanding of the commercial growers is that there are requirements under the Health Canada to mitigate those odors, and our understanding is that the bulk of the odor does come from harvesting, which is indoors.
Okay, thank you, Bren. Thanks, Mayor.
Councillor Carpenter, then Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bren, that's a great segue for my ward mate left me. So under the recommendations though proposed, you're making no difference between cannabis grown for medical or commercial. And my concern is the cannabis grown for medical where 8 or 9 people get together and they put their prescriptions together and they're growing it in a neighborhood, within next to an industrial area. But my concern is why did we not bring forward a recommendation that sort of dealt with zoning based upon Health Canada's regulations? So, for example, Health Canada doesn't regulate these the certificates for medical growing, but it does for commercial. And commercial is well regulated. There's plenty of regulations that, and their license can be revoked and all kinds of things are under the regulation. But on the medical, there seems to be very little regulation that the federal government has put in place. So why would we not separate those two as far as zoning and where they need to be?
Through the mayor, we have developed the definition to incorporate both uses and proposed a separation distance specifically due to these medical registrations. 4 people is the maximum of people that can combine their prescriptions. We have received no complaints from any commercial growers in the municipality, and that was our basis originally for not recommending any separation distance, on the understanding that these medical registrations can combine in these industrial facilities and grow without restrictions. That is when we proposed to implement the separation distance, because we understand that those facilities do have opportunities to emit odor. And when implementing that separation distance, we based it on the D6 guidelines. So we've combined them as we feel it's appropriate for both uses.
And then finally, I know we have a number of possible amendments before us. So, is it possible, it obviously must be, is it possible to amend this recommendation to, could be 150 meters somewhere else, and it could be 400 meters within the Mission Estates live community area where the houses back right onto it?
Yes, so that is a possibility. There can be a bylaw crafted in a way that we separate out both uses, or do provide a variety of separation distances dependent on the location, if that's what is proposed.
And just finally, Bryn, thanks for your report and all your work. I don't want staff to think that we're picking on you, because we're not. You did a fine job in the report. The last thing I'd want to say, if we don't pass something, we're wide open. They can be located anywhere right now. There's no regulations other than industrial zones.
They can be, yes, so they can locate in any M2 general industrial zone currently. So if nothing is passed, that will continue on.
And as I found out from the Brock Street example, even building permits, there's no requirement for us under the building code to look at how the structure of a marijuana grow operation is done, right? But as long as they're meeting the electrical guideline, whether they've got 3,600 plants in there and broken windows, we have no requirement under the building code. I guess you can't speak to that.
I can speak to the fact that if they are doing any sort of renovation that requires a building permit, it would just be the typical requirements. There's no for an industrial building. So there's no other requirements, yes.
Yeah. So if they put a couple of washrooms, then they get a building permit, but other than putting the lights and everything, it's not required. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. I'm not sure if this is a question you would be able to answer. Might be a legal question, but so in your report, you're recommending that we go with 70 meters. So if council decides to increase that to 200, 300, 400, whatever that number is going to end up being, and this gets appealed, does that run us into a situation where, because staff recommended 70, council is increasing that number, does that make it so staff are no longer in a position to defend council's direction? So would we have to get planners, lawyers to defend and appeal, or how would that work?
Through the chair, I think I'll just let Joe Muto speak to that in a little more detail, just as it's regarding appeals.
I'd be glad to, but I see that Mr. Vries is ready to speak to it. If you want to speak to it, Mr. Vries.
Through the chair, Heidi DeVries, City Solicitor, Director of Legal and Real Estate Services. It's our practice in the city that if council makes a decision contrary to a staff recommendation, we typically do hire external planners to defend that position on appeal. But in this instance, we would look at whether or not staff would still be in a position to support the amendment and determine whether or not we would have to hire an expert otherwise to actually provide expert evidence at the tribunal.
Okay, thank you for that. I think that's some information that I think we would all like to see probably at council meeting. So whatever our decision is today, if staff could maybe take a look at that decision and then come back to city staff or to council to let us know how that would unfold in the event that there is an appeal. And then my next question, so we talked about growing has to be indoors, they can store outdoors. Can you just clarify, what about other production methods?
Through the chair, do you mean in terms of edibles and oils and things like that?
Yes.
So those can be grown in the same facilities as commercial growers. They just have to get the proper permitting through Health Canada. In terms of the medical registrations, I believe they can only do dried cannabis, but I am not certain on that. So I would have to look into that.
Okay, yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because that's a little alarming to me. Some of the processes that are used to, they have the bud of the plant, they cut all the trimmings, and then they actually use all the trimmings and they dilute them in like an acetone type of material, and then they put it under pressure to get some of the extracts, and that that'll be very smelly, like using an acetone, having that pressure in a vessel that they have to use. So I think that'll actually probably be a worse smell than just the cannabis odor itself. Typically that's done indoors though, so there is a little bit of protection.
Councilor Weaver, got a question there?
Yeah, I'm just ramping that up, Mr. Mayor. I'll save it to comments, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
All right. Councilor Martin.
Thank you. Is there anything in the bylaw that prevents a grower from using natural fertilizers, manures?
No, there is not.
Okay, and any facilities that are already in place would not be affected by this. They'd be grandfathered if we increase the distance that would take them in.
Through the chair, so any existing facility that has received all their permits and is currently operating would be grandfathered, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Wolf.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I don't understand this process entirely. So my question would be is why do we need to have like a blanket statement for this? Like, are we not able to have a zoning bylaw that says we'll analyze each facility as it opens up on a case-by-case basis based upon what the neighborhoods want?
Through the mayor, so that basically, that process would be that it depends on the situation. So there are a variety of processes that could be put in place if that's something that you are wanting to implement. So for example, if it isn't something that is permitted within the zone, a zoning bylaw amendment would be required anytime someone would want to implement a facility, and that is the whole zoning bylaw amendment process. There is also the opportunity that if we make cannabis production and processing facilities require site plan, most of the time they would anyways, because if they are building a new building, they would require site plan control. However, there are facilities that are being put into existing buildings. So requiring site plan control for cannabis production and processing facilities would be another possibility. And that would not go to council. That is just council are part of the site plan process. But it is, but those are two opportunities in terms of if you're wanting to analyze them on a case by case basis.
So is that in the report now?
That is not what we're recommending. That would be, so it would basically be prohibiting the use if you're going the zoning bylaw amendment route in all areas, and then it would be an application every single time. However, we feel it's an industrial use, and we propose that it be a permitted use because it is industrial in nature. In order to go that route, you would have to prohibit the use within the bylaw, and then, sorry, define it, and then you would have, not prohibit, define it, and then require a zoning bylaw amendment. However, that is not a route we typically take in terms of adding uses.
So what would be the closest comparison here to something else? Like, obviously this is cannabis. People have views on cannabis because of the stigma on cannabis for the last ever. And, you know, I'm reading the emails here. I'm going through the report. Some people don't care and some people do care. I guess, sorry, the question is, what is the closest comparison? What is something like this that would stir up the same kind of controversy if it was going to open up in the neighborhood?
Through the mayor, it's difficult to provide an example because I do think because this is a new legal use, a lot of public input is because it's a new use and people do not know the parameters of the odor or things yet because the use has not been around. In terms of the odor emitted, it is an industrial use. Industrial uses often have odors, so that is kind of it. It would be typical with any other odor emitting industrial use, but providing a similar example is difficult.
Is there anything else that we do in this city of a similar sort that is decided on a case-by-case basis?
I do not believe so, not in the way that you are suggesting. However, I would ask Joe to confirm that just in case I am incorrect.
Thanks, Bryn. Through the mayor to Councillor Wall, I think when developing any implementing zoning bylaw or any new comprehensive bylaw for that matter is, you know, there's historically there's you value more restrictive versus permissive, and I think when you craft a bylaw of this nature, it currently exists in the bylaw today. It's considered a manufacturing use and an agricultural use, which is permitted in that M2 zone that Ms. O'Neill has already explained to council this evening. I think when you go down the list of permitted uses, we don't pull out the ones that we don't want to see, and I don't think and believe that that's something that would really hold well. We're trying to be reasonable here, understanding that there is that stigma as you indicated, but it is currently exists today. It's a manufacturing use. It's identified in as a manufacturing use in our municipality and the case studies that Ms. O'Neill had reviewed as well. I think the understanding here is that there's value in a separation distance, and albeit it may not be what is recommended by planning as in terms of that 70 meters, it may deviate from that obviously, but if that helps out, Councillor Wall, I'm not sure if I really answered your question. We don't tend to draft bylaws where they're so restrictive and then we go back and do that, but that could be a case in this instance if that's what something council wishes to do.
Trying to say everything I say is a question. I would like to see before the council meeting what deciding this on a case-by-case basis would look like. Is that possible?
Through the mayor to Councillor Wall, I think what the challenge with that, we could do that and provide you with some form of memo at the council or before the council meeting through the mayor to Councillor Wall. But I think the idea here is that you know, our community has taken well to this, given that there's already 5 or 4 in the mix and 3 or 4 existing currently. We would be set up for continual rezonings if that is the case too. So, you know, those are more applications that we need to process as well, and the time involved, and that time is even more difficult these days with virtual public meetings and what have you. But that's
so then, forgive me, allow me to ask this question then. If people in the east end of Brantford don't want a cannabis facility and they've protested against it, written letters and contacted their councillors, but people in the west end don't care, why do we have to have a rule that is exactly the same for both ends of town? Like, why can't we have, like, because it seems to me like that's where the confusion is. Like, people over in
Okay,
Warsaw.
I think we'll leave it at that, Councillor Wall. That's a question. You asked a question there. So Ms. O'Neill or Ms. Muto, can you answer that question? Which I think is, why would there be, you know, different, I guess, different.
Why does it have to be a blanket statement? Why can't it be different? Like, how come it can't be flexible?
Different, I guess, different rules in different areas of the city. I think that's what we're saying.
Okay. So through the mayor, that it is possible to craft the bylaw in a way that there are different separation distances in different areas of town. We are recommending 70-meter separation distance for ease of implementation. However, that is not to say that there cannot be a different separation distance in the east rather than the west. That is something that we can craft into the bylaw if that's the route we are wanting to take.
Okay, so you've hit what I'm trying to get to. Why does it doesn't have to be directional though, right? Like, couldn't it be when an application for cannabis production facility is put in, that there is a conversation on whether or not it should be 70, 100, 200, 400? Like, couldn't we have like a flexible bylaw that basically stated that, like, when someone applies, the community gets consulted, and if the community doesn't care, then it gets to 70. But if the community does care, it gets the 400. Like, is that not a thing? Like, I don't understand what has to be black
So
and
you've
white.
asked the Councillor Wall, you've asked the question. Let's get an answer.
So the way that you're basically describing what the rezoning process would be, that's the process we have under the Planning Act to get public input. So
then why are people so upset? If that's the policy already, then what are we deciding tonight?
Oh my God.
Whoa.
Oh.
Yeah,
So
Councillor Wall, do you have, so sorry, is there a question there rather than a comment?
We're deciding tonight whether it's 70 or whatever it could be amended to. And then that would be an effect for all of the areas over the entire city, unless it gets amended differently.
Through the mayor to the council, that is correct. And once this bylaw comes into force and effect, whatever separation distance is entrenched in this particular zoning bylaw amendment can be amended from time to time based on whatever application comes our way.
All right. Any other questions, Councillor Wall?
No, thank you.
All right, Councillor Vanderstel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Joe. Along with the allowable uses, how far are we drilling down with this? My experience of cannabis production facilities extends to the labs that are interior to the building, the grow situation, the different rooms, growing situation rooms. And I know full well that in certain circumstances, there's a higher CFM. So there's more air being moved through and out of the building, depending on what type of product is being used, what is being grown, how much is being grown. So if we're going to study things like, wind direction and the effect it's going to have on people downwind, I think we also probably need to know if it's a positive.
Councillor Vanderstel, do you have a question?
How do we determine how much air is being expelled in the building?
through the mayor, that is something that I am not an expert in how wind studies are completed. So I think that's something, if that is the route that is being taken, that would be something the consultant would have to look at, because I do not know.
Okay, thank you. I'll save the rest of what I have to say for the comments.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none. So a little bit different since the city is the applicant here. But at this time, this section of the hearing, we'd be throwing the floor open to members of the public commenting on this. Due to the fact that we're meeting virtually, someone wanting to comment, as indicated in the various notices provided by the public, provided by the city, you have to register prior to the meeting so that arrangements can be made for you to join virtually. And you've seen that in other evenings we've had delegation to us. In this case, we've received no registrants who wish to speak to the item tonight. Of course, we have received lots of written comment and emails. And so at this point, following the normal procedure, I would ask the agent, which in this case, our city staff, if there's anything further that you want to add as a statement of clarification coming out of the questions that have been asked.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the intent of the proposal as it is currently is to clarify what the cannabis production and processing facilities requirements are under our zoning bylaw, because right now there are none. They are just simply permitted. The intent with the 70-meter separation distance is to be consistent with the provincial D6 guidelines, which are the only guidelines that we have in terms of separation distances and for industrial and sensitive land uses. So we are basing our recommendation off of those guidelines. So nothing further to add, just that we're just trying to clarify the use for ease of implementation, as well as ensuring that the appropriate separation distance is within the bylaw.
All right. Any questions in respect to that, Councillor McCreary?
Mayor, no, I was too quick putting my hand up.
I take it did you want to move the motions? We need that now to get this on the floor for discussion. I believe actually Councillor Martin is going to move the item. So Councillor Martin, if you're prepared to do that, if you would please read the resolution that's actually going to be on the floor.
Okay, thank you. I move, seconded by Councillor McCreary, that zoning bylaw amendment application number PZ0618 initiated by the Corporation of the City of Brantford to amend zoning bylaw 160-90 by adding cannabis production and processing facility as a definition, adding general provisions for cannabis production facilities, updating the general industrial M2 zone to restrict where cannabis production and processing facilities are permitted, and implementing a separation distance of 400 meters between cannabis production and processing facilities and residential zones be approved in accordance with the applicable provisions as noted in Section 8 of Report 2020-199, and B, that zoning bylaw amendment application PZ0618 initiated by the Corporation of the City of Brantford to amend the County of Brant zoning bylaw 61-16 by adding cannabis production and processing facilities as a definition, modifying some existing definitions, and updating zoning provisions to prohibit the use of cannabis production and processing facilities in all zones be approved according to the applicable provisions as noted in Section 8 of Report 2020-199, and C, that pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, CP 13, the following statement shall be included in the notice of decision. Regard has been had for all written and oral submissions received from the public before the decision was made in relation to this planning matter as discussed in sections 6.2 and 8.1 of the report 2020-199. And speaking to this, I think it's appropriate to move this with a separation distance of 400 meters, given the questions that have come up on the previous part of this meeting. Given that there's no restriction for a growing facility to bring in their, some road apples, also known as horse manure, and store it outside their facility until they're ready to use it. Now, I, for one, would not want that within 70 meters of my property. So I think 400 meters is an appropriate distance to go. And when Councillor Wall asked about something that's comparable, the thing that came to my mind is all the problems they're having in the county with the rendering plant that they have out there. The residents were promised that it was going to be odor-free, and that was not the case. And they've got a heck of a fight on their hands trying to resolve that issue after the fact. I think by getting out in front of this, we can head off some of these problems and hopefully avoid some of the problems that would otherwise be there if they're allowed to have these facilities in close proximity to residential areas.
I think what I'll do to move things along, I think it's obvious that there's a desire to make an amendment, and Councillor Antosky's already indicated to us that's what she would like to do. So to focus the discussion, unless anyone has any objection, I'll just let Councillor Antosky, she has actually got her hand up anyways, and she's given us prior notice of her intent. Councillor Antosky, why don't you proceed with your amendment, and we'll debate that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The amendment reads that clause A be amended to implement a separation distance of 400 meters between cannabis production and processing facilities and residential zones, and it's seconded by Councillor Carpenter.
Okay.
Point of order. Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I read the resolution with a 400-meter separation. That's already what's on the floor. There's no need to amend it.
Wasn't the resolution 70?
As read, it was 400 meters. I didn't read it as 70 meters as was written in our supplied information.
Okay. I think you got me. So if that's what then you moved it, so you were the mover, and I'm corrected. Thank you. So Councillor Antosky, why don't you speak to it?
I'll second that. Yeah, I agree with many of the things that have been said, and I think that we do need to get ahead of it. We're talking about guidelines that are very old. They haven't dealt with cannabis. We're likely to see these compared with smells like paint and thinner, particularly when we've got outside storage. There's a reason that our planning departments don't allow residential zoning and industrial zoning to exist anymore. So we have to deal with the ones that already exist. They've been problematic. Certainly in Ward 4, we've had huge issues, and this is another one. So I would think that in the same spirit of what we're doing with the older neighborhoods, we start moving away from it. We don't keep enhancing it or continuing the problem that the residents have to live with. And we have to look at hopefully the guidelines updating themselves to new industries that are coming out that people have to deal with. We got a lot of information and a lot of feedback and a lot of correspondence from people that are against this. And yes, most of the complaints have come from the Garden Avenue, but that's because we had a couple of residents that were on top of this, saw this in the newspapers, went, holy crow, we didn't know this was coming. We need to let our residents know. And they've been pounding the pavement and talking to people, and people are not in favor of it. That may not be the case in Ward 2, which is also affected quite significantly by this. And there's a border in Ward 3 of one of the proposed ones. So it may be that they would be just as upset if they were aware at this point. I looked up what an average block is. We're asking about a separation at 400 meters, about 4 to 5 blocks separation. It's not huge. I also do not have comfort in the fact that Health Canada is the enforcer on this based on what we've been through, and knowing that it will be completely out of our hands if things are not handled the way we're being told they're going to be handled. So let's put the horse in front of the cart on this one. I'm going to paraphrase what one of our very smart staff said earlier tonight. They said, value more restrictive approach than a permissive approach. And that's what I want to see us do here. Let's go with the 400 meters. If once we have the 400 meters and we have no complaints and everything, and people walk by it and don't smell anything, then maybe we can address it. But right now, there's no comfort that people are going to live with all these promises. So I'm hoping that we will vote for the 400. I hope it's unanimous. This really is also about supporting the ward councillors that have to deal most directly with this, which is very concentrated in a couple of areas. So I hope that this is unanimous and that we support our residents on this. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Next up, Councillor Utley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I prefer to start with the 400 it's easier to reduce it later than it is to increase it at a later date. And start off cautiously, and hopefully, we won't have the same reaction from others in Ward 4 who, reacted pretty strongly and vocally about the distance. So again, thank you to staff as well. Very good report. And I like the way it's been laid out with the different separation distances. Thank you.
Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You're doing a fine job. I want to thank you, Councillor Martin, for moving this forward to the 400 meters. It's too bad that we have to do something to protect residents from the bad apples in the industry. And I spoke about Brock Street and what's going on in that neighborhood. But we have facilities in the city that are doing a very good job. And most people wouldn't even know they're there. If I told them there was a facility there, they would say, I didn't know that, because they're doing a great job. The difficulty we have is that the community has no trust in Health Canada and their regulations and enforcement. I mean, how does a grow operation of 3,600 plants get busted by our police department and are allowed to keep 1,000 plants? How does that happen? How does Health Canada not shut someone down, that allegedly broke the law by growing what they weren't allowed to grow? So just the fact that that still exists and is still allowed to exist and hasn't been shut down tells me that Health Canada is not on their game. So it's difficult for us to support this industry when the Health Canada is not enforcing the regulations or tightening the regulations if they're not there for this particular grow operation. So we have to err on the side of protecting the neighborhood. And we're talking about a residential neighborhood that wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. That was all supposed to be industrial. It was past councils of the day being lobbied by developers to make an industrial area a residential area. It gives it much more value. And the same with, you look into the industrial area off of Linden Road that backs into Brentwood Park. That was long before my time. Again, we were short on industrial land and we pushed into a residential area. Today we still have problems with diesel trucks firing up back right onto residential properties. That's not good planning. So let's err on the side of protecting the residents first. And when the regulations follow and some enforcement happens with Health Canada, and we see some action from the federal government on regulation, then we can feel more comfortable, and so can the residents if we relax it then. But right now, we need strong regulation to protect our community. Thank you for all those that have spoken support. I appreciate it.
Okay. Next up, I have Councillor Sluss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it was talked about in the county have a rendering plant that they had to deal with. It wasn't that long ago. They had a mushroom farm that they had an awful time with. Same type of thing. They're growing things, and there was a heck of an odor, and they had problems dealing with it. The reason that I think all the complaints are coming out of the east end and not the west end, the houses haven't been built yet. If I was the owner of that property that was trying to develop it and found out this was going to be on the border of it 70 meters away, I'd be screaming. And he's going to have fun selling homes if that's what they find in their backyards. So while we haven't had complaints, we certainly will have if we don't, I think, set it straight right from the very beginning. I'm certainly in support of the 400 meters, but more importantly, I think it's important that we amend this and that we get it approved this evening. I think it was said earlier, we don't have any regulations right now, that somebody could come in and do things that we really don't want happening in the city. And it would be our own fault. So I think it's important that this move forward this evening, but I think it's also important that it move forward with the amendment that's been inserted into the resolution. So I'll be certainly supporting it and pleased to. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McCurry.
Mayor, thank you. I have a couple of amendments I'd like to introduce with your leave.
Well, I'll tell you what. So as
I would remind you, you went to Councillor Antosky to move one off the hop.
Yeah, that's because I accept that, but it'd be somewhat unfair. We've had, at least half the council spoken to this once, and I'm going to rule that certainly I will take yours as the First Amendment, but I think to be fair that we should allow the remaining half of the council an opportunity for first speaking on this. If it came right off the hopper, that's a bit different, okay? So do you want to speak to it before we take your amendment after you've heard from others, or?
Just to indicate my heated agreement.
All right. Councillor Vanderstel.
Sorry, I had some technical difficulties there. To me, this is cut and dried, pardon the pun. We simply don't know enough about the volume of product being moved through these facilities. I haven't even started asking questions about fire suppression. Can you imagine if one of these places caught fire? Can you imagine the effect that would have on residents who are almost right next door? So rather than going through a long diatribe, I think I'm comfortable with the 400. And I also do have, when everyone else has had a chance to speak, a question and possibly another amendment. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually have a procedural question. So we have a staff report. Within the staff report, it states 70 meters. And now we've read the staff recommendation, and we've amended the staff recommendation without actually an amendment being in the minutes. So I'm just wondering if there's not concerns around not actually having an amendment to show how we came to that decision-making process. So I do believe respectfully that the amendment that Councillor Antosky was going to issue is in order, and I don't believe the other one is. So I was wondering if you could rule on that.
Yeah, I've ruled on it. And the point of order that came to me through Councillor Martin, I ruled that he was correct. That's how he read the motion, the resolution. That's what was put on the floor.
So there's no concerns about having something amended without actually having an amending motion in the minutes?
No.
Okay.
I understand your concern, but I've made my ruling, so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so actually, Councilor Lentosky actually called me earlier to talk about her amendment that she was going to be making tonight. I'm in full support. We had a good conversation about it. I've actually been in several facilities through my day job, and I can protest that the smell during harvesting is quite strong. And in particular, if you're driving towards Ancaster, going to the industrial park by Ancaster, there's a grow facility there, and you can smell it from the roadway. And it's got to be probably 300 meters away. So I think starting at 400 is a great step. I think that should definitely be our default. And this is new. I think what this amendment will do is hopefully prevent all of us from getting lots of calls and future councilors getting lots of calls when things change a little bit, like production methodology and the way they do things differently as they progress. So I'm in full support. And
so you're cut off there, Councillor Weaver. I think you hit the mute button, or you took your hand up.
I took my finger off the pause button, so I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Wall, the last speaker before I go to Councillor McCurry for an amendment.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm in support of this. It seems to be the right thing to do for now. I can ask a question of staff. That's okay.
You can use your 4 minutes as you wish.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. If this passes as is, and then a plant wants to open and they want to do less than 400, they can appeal it. Is that correct? Is that what I'm? Yes or no?
Well, they'd have to apply for an amendment to the zoning bylaw. So.
Yep, you're answering? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, they can.
By applying for an amendment.
So if they wanted to open up in an area where it wasn't, yeah. Okay, I've got my answer. I'm in support of this. There's no reason not to support it if they could ask to amend it. Why not? Thank you.
So, Councillor McCurry.
Oh,
your amendment.
I should be in the queue there.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you haven't seen your raised hand there, Councillor Van Tilburg. So
it's under participants, isn't it?
Yes, somehow you haven't shown up here. Okay,
No,
go ahead.
It shows up on my screen. Look, 400 meters isn't all that far, especially when you're dealing with a smell. 400 meters is where we have to draw the line, not like it's a starting place and that we fall back. We should not have to fall back. I think every one of us here is doing what we believe is absolutely 100% correct for residents living in homes near industrial centers. And that's part of the problem. We should never be having residential homes near industrial centers within 400 meters. The fact that we're having this discussion is completely wrong in the beginning. We just shouldn't be doing it. We shouldn't do it in the future. What's done in the past is done. So now the only way that we can protect the residents, and there's a couple things that go on. I say, hey, you bought a home, you're near an industrial area. I'm sorry, but you know what? I'm for jobs and you got to live with the consequences. You should have drove around your neighborhood. But when we're bringing something in that we can control, you don't go and reduce it down to 70 meters. Not when you have residents nearby. Those smells on any given day can drift and they can be quite putrid. And when I followed the county issue pretty, man, it was ugly. A rendering plant's ugly. Will this meet the same level of the rendering plant? Quite possible. I'm not going to answer that. What I'm going to say is that the way we protect against that, I heard what all the people in the county were told. How won't do this, won't do that. And boy, did they ever have their hands full afterwards. This is all the counselors here are on board. There is no reason for a company to come in and apply to a lesser standard. This is our opportunity to set the standard. Quite frankly, if I could go 500 meters, I'd go 500 meters. 400's on the table. Looks like we're all comfortable with that. Anybody that wants to be in this industry can go into an industrial zone, pick up a plot of land 400 meters away from residential property, and they can do as they please. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And when we're talking about the ones that we haven't had any complaints about, well, guess where they are? They're not within that range. And guess where we are having problems? Where they are within that range. So this is a good move, I think, on behalf of all of council. I think that we all got to join our arms, because I would hate to see somebody try and push back on this. I think that's wrong. I think what we're doing is absolutely correct for the residents, good for the community. It builds a better society. And, once you start that little mix with industrial, you get mission creep, and you give a little here and you give a little there. And, the next thing you know, when you're near 70 meters, you're closer to the noise. You're getting even more. So let's not go down that path. Let's stick tight on this. The 400 meters is good. Like I said, could have went bigger. 400 meters, if you do it's not a lot. And as Councillor Weaver mentioned earlier, he was probably 300 meters and was overwhelmed. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, so everybody now has spoken, except me, but I'm the chair. I'll wait until I see your amendment. So Councillor McCurry, you've told us you would like to put an amendment on the floor, so now's your time.
Mayor, thank you. I believe it's going to be seconded by Councillor Martin. The amendment would read sort of like this, that as an additional condition, that there'd be a prohibition against the storage of waste soils, plant material, organics, and fertilizers outdoors.
So the prohibition of organics.
Yeah, I'll say it one more time. Waste soils, waste soils and plant material, comma, organics, organic fertilizers be prohibited.
Okay. First speaking opportunity goes to you.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it makes sense to do as much as we can to protect the quality of life of the people that live within the city, and allowing the storage of this stuff outdoors would be a pretty big loophole. And I doubt very much that there'd be any enforcement that we'd be able to do. Lord knows it's difficult enough now, as Councillor Carpenter has said, to enforce the regulations with one of the companies in town now. So I would hope that everybody would support this. Perhaps there's some way to improve it, and maybe between now and the time it comes back to us at council, staff can fine tune that somewhat to make sure that all of our contingencies are covered. Thanks, Mayor.
Councillor Martin to the amendment.
Yes, I was happy to second this. This is something that I think is very important. Somebody mentioned earlier the issue with the mushroom farm. Well, with this marijuana growing, there's nothing stopping them from using the same grow medium that causes a problem with the mushroom farm. We all know mushrooms don't have that strong a smell. It's what they grow it in that has the strong smell. And this amendment prohibits the storage of that material outdoors, which helps to protect the neighborhood and the people in the area. So I think this is a good addition to the resolution, and I hope everyone can support it. Thank you.
Not seeing anyone wanting to speak to the amendment. I'll call the vote then on the amendment.
The amendment to item 5.1 carries unanimously on recorded vote. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Sless, Councillor Martin, Councillor Antosky, Councillor Wall, Councillor Van Tilburg, Councillor Carpenter, Councillor McCreary, Councillor Utley, Councillor Weaver, and Mayor Davis.
Mayor, I have one more.
Yep. Go ahead.
Let me preface this first by saying that this would be an item which would come back to us much later following the implementation of the bylaw. And the amendment would read that staff be instructed to report back to council regarding a citywide wind study, citing costs, funding source, and details. And I believe Councillor Martin will second that.
So Councillor Martin, you're seconding that?
Yes.
All right. So just to make sure that I understand, so staff be instructed to
report back to council at a later date regarding a citywide wind study, citing costs, funding source, and details.
Yep.
And Mayor, let me just speak to that very briefly.
Yes.
This would occur after we do this bylaw, so we'd have the bylaw in place. But I think it's to our benefit to know, what we're looking at really with respect to prevailing winds and wind speeds. And it may have some bearing on fine tuning this at a later date, if we so choose to do that. I believe staffing, maybe I misheard that, but I believe staff indicated it could be something like $15,000. And certainly if it's not budgeted for, we could produce it out of one of the council funds that's available to us. So thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Martin? Nope. Yep. Anybody else wish to speak to the amendment? Not seeing any raised hands. Let's call, Mr. Deputy Clerk, let's call the vote on this, please.
The amendment to item 5.1 carries unanimously on recorded vote. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Sless, Councillor Martin, Councillor Antosky, Councillor Wall, Councillor Weaver, Councillor Utley, Councillor McCreary, Councillor Carpenter, Councillor Van Tilburg, and Mayor Davis.
Thank you, Chris. All right, so any other amendments?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Vanderstel.
Thank you. Through you to Heidi in our legal department. as I understand it now, there will be a setback applied to any of the processing plants in the county by 150 meters. Is it possible that we can impose a 400-meter setback into the county lands? Because if we don't, then anybody who lives currently on the perimeter of the built boundary of the city of Brantford may be subject to things that we can't protect them against. Do we have the capacity to set that up, or is that something that's beyond our scope?
Through the chair, Heidi DeVries, City Solicitor. If you'd like a fulsome legal opinion on that point, I'd be happy to deliver it to you confidentially. But generally speaking, as a planning authority, you are restricted to the lands within your jurisdiction, and the county lands are not within your jurisdiction.
That's what I expected. Thank you very much, Heidi. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have an amendment based on that fact.
Okay. So I'm not seeing any further raised hands for amendments. So it has been amended now twice successfully. So everybody has 2 rounds if they want to speak again to the resolution as amended. So if you're interested, I'll watch for your raised hands. Yeah, I haven't spoken to it. So now that it's all been amended, honestly, I can support this as well. And I commend the hard work and effort of the Ward 4 councillors setting this up. And then, of course, Ward 2 councillors in moving this with the 400-meter separation distance. And to my mind, we're dealing with a new manufacturing process, cannabis. The experience to date has certainly been mixed. Some manufacturers have been very diligent about controlling odors and other noxious fumes and vapors from their production facilities, but some haven't. And we're pretty clear to see, as indicated, that we can't rely on the higher levels of government. And I also draw some comfort from the fact that, on the class 3 manufacturers, the distance is 300 meters to 300 to 1,000 meters. And, who's to say this shouldn't go into that class? And certainly there's elements of it, I think, that might qualify for, let's call the low end of class 3, which 400 meters would be. So I think it's defensible what we've done. And I would say to planning staff, I accept the fact that you provide us with your best opinion. And I think it really comes down to what class you put it into. And then, of course, there's listening to the residents who have had some experience with this as related by Councillor Carpenter with that facility. So I'm quite happy to support this as well as it's been moved and amended. So not seeing anyone else wanting to speak to it. Mr. Deputy Clerk, let's call the vote.
Item 5.1 as amended carries unanimously on recorded votes. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Sluss, Councillor Martin, Councillor Antosky, Councillor Wall, Councillor Van Tilburg, Councillor Carpenter, Councillor McCurry, Councillor Utley, Councillor Weaver, and Mayor Davis.
All right, thank you, Mr. Deputy Clerk. So in accordance with our new procedural bylaw, I'll now turn over the chairing of this Committee of the Whole over to Councillor Weaver.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So members of committee, there are 3 registered delegations for appearing on tonight's agenda. The delegates will have 10 minutes inclusive of questions of committee members. In keeping with the City of Brantford's procedural bylaw, section 15.6.2, please ensure all comments are related to the matter before the committee. When your name is called, please come forward to the delegates table, state your name for the clerk, and commence your comments. And we'll have a little bit of a pause to make sure we can get people into our room here. So item 6.1 first is the Heritage Registry Project final report. And that is Josh Harrison he's the general manager of SC Johnson Wax. So Josh, could you, let's see, has staff there he is. Hi, Josh, is your camera going to be turned on?
I'm attempting to from this end. So can you hear me first and foremost?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear, sir.
All right, even better if you can see me. So let me try this again. Yeah, unfortunately, I do have my video running and it's not coming on for whatever reason.
Okay, so just a question for clerks. Is that a mandatory that we need to have a visual of the delegations, or are we able to continue?
Through the chair, we're able to continue. We do have the option for delegates to call in, so this would be no different.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, Josh, if you could just introduce yourself, and then I'll start the clock for your 10 minutes.
Awesome, I appreciate that. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Josh Harrison, and I'm the General Manager at SC Johnson Canada. On behalf of the company and our 250 employees here in Brantford, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening and quite frankly, to share our point of view on the Heritage Register project and what it could mean for our company. So if I give just a brief background on SC Johnson Canada and our operations. SC Johnson Canada was founded in 1920. We celebrated our 100th anniversary this year. Our primary manufacturing site and Canadian commercial headquarters are located at 1 Webster Street here in Brantford. We and the Johnson family are very proud of the company's long history in Brantford, not only as an employer, but also as a responsible corporate citizen and an active member of the community. Just a few of the brands and products we manufacture here in our Brantford facility are Glade Candles, Glade Wax Melts, Glade Solids, and our professional hand soaps lineup. We are deeply rooted in the community and committed to well-being. For example, over the past year, we have made more than $2 million Canadian in contributions to support nonprofit organizations in and around the Brantford area. SC Johnson has been following the Brantford Heritage Register project with great interest. We have invested time in understanding the goals of the project and have evaluated its potential impact on our company's operations. As a part of the stakeholder engagement process, we submitted a letter on December 13th stating our concerns about the potential consequences of the heritage listing and expressing our strong preference to avoid inclusion of SC Johnson's property located at 1 Webster on the registered as a listed property. Since that time, the recommended report has been released and our Webster Street property has been recommended for inclusion on the City of Brantford Heritage Register as a non-designated listed property. We remain respectful of the fact that our property is considered unique, and we understand the stated benefits of inclusion on the register of non-designated properties. Simply put, as a dynamic and growing business, we continue to believe our concerns outweigh the potential benefits identified in this report. While SC Johnson has no plans to demolish any buildings on the property, we believe a heritage register listing could limit operational flexibility, may cause unnecessary delays, and impact future business decisions related to the site's physical footprint. Therefore, our ask, we continue to seek to avoid inclusion on the register as a listed property. In closing, I would just say, we understand and recognize the importance of this project to the city of Brantford. And I just, again, thank everyone for the opportunity to speak. And for the record, I am wearing a jacket.
Well, thank you for that, Josh. So we do have some time left, and we have 2 councillors that wish to ask you some questions. So we'll start with Councillor Sless, followed by Councillor Utley. So Councillor Sless, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Josh, for coming and making your presentation. If you will recall, you did send an email, I believe, to Councillor Utley and myself, and I had responded back to you that I would be making an amendment to the presentation this evening, removing your company and your building from the registry, and that is still my intent, and I have that in front of me. So that'll be coming later on in our agenda when we deal with this item. But as far as SC Johnson, I would just like to say to you personally, thank you so much for all you do in our community. It's really, really, really appreciated, and it's noticed. And thank you again.
Councillor Utley, do you have any questions for Mr. Harrison?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Josh. Good to hear you. Pleased that you're wearing a jacket. One of the questions I've got, Josh, is are any of the original buildings or structures still in place at 1 Webster?
Great question. And through the mayor. I would have to go back and do some historical digging. My understanding is yes, but I'd want to be a little more fact-based in my response there. I mean, we've obviously added additions. I think we've added 5 or 6 throughout the years. But my understanding is that there's portions of the original structure from 1920 that still exists.
Okay. And then my second, you alluded to it a little bit, Josh, on the challenges facing businesses during this pandemic. And I think you mentioned you need to be a lot more flexible. Are you seeing added pressures due to the COVID crisis?
Through the mayor, absolutely. I mean, I'd say demand for our products have never been greater. As a family company, what makes me feel absolutely fantastic is the products that we produce are help combating this virus. So operational flexibility remains of the utmost of importance.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. And again, I want to add my thanks to SCJ for your enormous contribution to our city over the past 100 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wall, please go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks for coming, Josh. How long has SC Johnson been using the building?
Through the mayor, we've been in the building for 100 years.
Oh, was it ever anything else?
To my recollection, no. Manufacturing's been there, as I said, in the footprint for 100 years.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCreary, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much. Welcome, Josh. Thanks for being with us tonight. And thanks for everything that your company does in our community. It's a significant contributor here. I just wanted to ask you one question. You are aware, of course, that the registry is a tool for heritage preservation, and that what would really impact upon the corporation would be a designation. So you'd be aware that in the event of a designation, it would only affect the building as it faces the street, certainly not the entirety of the building. It would simply recognize the heritage value of that. Could you just affirm that, Josh?
Through the mayor, yes, that is our understanding. And looking at all the benefits and the challenges associated with the register, we still heavily feel that we would like to be excluded. Sure,
and I was glad to hear you say that you much appreciate the recognition that we felt for the building. It's certainly an iconic building in this city, and not just because of the architecture, but because of who lives there. So thanks again, Josh.
Thank you, Councillor. Josh, I don't have any other questions before us. So with that, we'll move on to the next delegation. Thank you very much, Josh. So next delegation, which is item 6.2, it's Nathan Etherington, who's the chair of the Brantford Heritage Committee. Is Nathan in the room yet?
Oh. The host has disabled my video, it says.
Okay, we'll get the clerk's department to take a look at that, Nathan.
Sure. There we go. Perfect, thank you. Can I have my presentation up as well?
Yep, so Nathan, you've got 10 minutes, inclusive of questions. As you know, you've been here a few times now, so welcome. Please, when you begin, just state your name.
Sure, my name's Nathan Etherington, and I'm the chair of the Brantford Heritage. I'm just waiting for the presentation.
Through the chair, we, clerk's department, did not receive a presentation.
Oh, okay. Well, I had it and I had it attached. Okay. I have it on here.
Are you able to proceed without the?
Yeah.
Great.
Because I have it here on my computer. Right.
Okay.
Okay. So, sorry. Okay, so sorry about that. When we started this project with the Heritage Register in with an RFP issued by the city of Brantford in 2017, the ASI was selected as the appropriate candidate, and they developed a phase 1 of the project, which include methodology, and they established city areas, thematic history, and architectural styles. Oh, here we go. Next slide, please. So some of community consultation was also conducted, and it identified other properties that should be included on the register. These are some of the thematic frameworks that were introduced by the developer: themes of agriculture, industrial, residential, civic and institutional, and commercial. Next slide. So as I said, 26 areas were established. This was done with the assistance of the Heritage Research Subcommittee at the time. And we evaluated areas that we thought the city should be broken into. Next slide. So in phase 2, the consultants conducted screening. They evaluated for 21 criteria, and then they rated those buildings based on their integrity, whether it had low integrity, sufficient integrity, or exceptional integrity. Next slide. As part of this, as well in phase 3, the archaeological potential maps were updated. Next slide. For the entire city, as well as the downtown core. And next slide. For the Arrowdale people in the crowd, Arrowdale is fully uncovered in the archaeological potential map. So there are no concerns with the development of that golf course. Next slide. Also included in the recommendations for the Heritage Register were some strong statements about heritage conservation districts, mentioning that they should be a cap established. There were previous reports that were produced with no actions taken. I included a comment that that the new official plan should undertake studies to establish more heritage conservation districts. And we heard a little bit about that last night at our Heritage Committee meeting. Next slide. So some of the objections, you can see here the original building at SC Johnson. Like they said, they had a long history in the city, and it was originally part of the waterworks site. The current building was built in 1974, the front part that you see. And I do have to acknowledge that SC Johnson has had a strong, lasting legacy and reputation as a community builder. And we would hope that this property would be included on the Heritage Register. As well, at the Heritage Committee meeting, I strongly stated that the Heritage Committee would be willing to work with them on redevelopment potential if they were included. Next slide. Another one was this house on Dufferin Ave. This was designed by Edwards and Wagner, who are architects. It was the former home of E.B. Crompton. He had Crompton's department store, which exploded with a gas explosion. And then they, the state rebuilt the arcade building at the corner of Queen and Colburn downtown. And it is a rare architecture form. Next slide. This home was also potential for an objection. This home was ticks off many of the boxes. It was predates the city of Brantford. Was home of Robert Henry, who was a mayor and the MPP. And industrial recognition was also important. So he operated the Brantford Soapworks on Jarvis Street, and then it was later owned by John Sanderson, who owned Adams Wagon Works, and then later became Brantford Coach and Body. Next slide. This other candidate was in the expansion lands. I have a strong working relationship with the County of Brant planning team, and so I received the information about this property. It represents a rare vanishing form in Tula Heights, and it has many representative elements of Italian buildings, such as brackets, coins, arch windows, and bay windows. Next slide. So phase 3 has the recommendations for properties to include on the Heritage Register. It is split into Group A and Group B. In Group A, we have a total of 101 properties. Next slide. Bill 108 had serious implications for the Heritage Register project. Bill 108 was introduced after the project began. I forwarded comments on Bill 108 to both our MPP and And then we now know that only 12% of properties that originally are proposed tonight to be included on the register will actually be on the register. When I had started this project, we were told that we would have a complete heritage register. I'd like to point out that this is not the fault of the city of Brantford. This is the province changing the rules in the middle of the game. Next slide. So we have had an ability to create a heritage register since 2005. At my first meeting in November of 2015, Nicole Wilmont was there, one of our planners, and we had a demolition permit for our property. And she said, there is no protection for this. We have a heritage inventory. Our heritage inventory is not a legal heritage register. In February 2017, I introduced the following motion to create a heritage register. I then got a call from staff saying that it wasn't specific enough and they were not going to follow the motion. However, that did result in the RFP getting written, and that did result in us getting to tonight, which will have the first legal heritage register for the city of Brantford in 15 years. Next slide. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you. We do have a few minutes left for questions. Councillor Antosky, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Nathan, we've had, or I've had some correspondence in relation to the differences between the start of what we had online for registry, registered properties, and what this project involves, and that it seems to lack the same amount of detail that we had in the older one. Can you explain why that might be, so people will understand that, you know, there's a fear that there's some detail that's being lost?
Yes, so that was a concern that was raised to me as well today. The problem with the existing heritage inventory is it had a lot of additional data. It was not standardized, and therefore we couldn't properly evaluate properties in order to create a heritage register. So part of this project cleaned up the existing heritage register and standardized the fields, but rest assured that the Brantford Heritage Inventory that has some of that very, very rich information in it will still be accessible on the city's website. Does that answer your question?
So that did it. So someone will easily be able to find it on the website. If they're looking at a specific property, they can plug that in and find all the detail that existed prior to the new project.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Antosky. Councillor Utley, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nathan, a great job with the committee. What does the committee, what do you and the committee think of the quality of the report?
Well, the report is really great because it gives us the starting foundation to build on. We didn't have a legal heritage register, and I know that you've heard me say many times before, we have designation or nothing. So this gives us an additional tool in our toolbox to help recognize properties that have potential and recognize them and save them before they get demolished. You know, there were some properties before that came before us, and it was sometimes a shock that they were coming before us for demolition.
Any surprises?
Any surprises on the list?
Yeah.
Of properties? No, I think they're all great candidates. There's a lot of great institutional buildings like Bodley buildings, and I think it will help strengthen the heritage aspects of our community.
Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Nathan. We're going to move on to our next delegation. So this item is 6.3, and it's Melissa Baranski and George Ziotek. So we'll give them a few minutes, or a few seconds rather, to get into the room and get their camera and mics on. There's Melissa, and there's George. Great. Who's going to be doing the presentation, or are you both sort of tag teaming it?
Mainly George will be speaking, and I'll be available for any questions.
Okay, just before you begin, if you could both just introduce yourself to committee, please, and then just go ahead.
All right, my name is Melissa Baranski, owner of 156 Glenwood Drive.
George, you have to unmute your mic, please.
There we go. Got it? Okay,
Yes, I can hear you.
George Ziotech, 10 Humberstone Avenue in Brantford, and I'm the agent for Ms. Baranski. And the purpose of our presentation is to take a look at, for council to consider, the refund that Melissa is requesting in respect of the development at 156 Glenwood Drive. The report 2020-311, I think it outlines pretty well the scope of what's happening. The only thing is that it doesn't really go into all the details as to how it evolved and how some of these difficulties arose, as it were. As noted in item number 5.0, October 10th, 2018, there was an application, if you will, for consent. And through a long, arduous process, it took up until October 11th of 2019 for it to be approved, which basically is a year. And in that process, it just seems to be like a long, drawn out process of, well, let's verify, let's get information, and so on and so forth, whereas I was trying to provide this information on an ongoing basis, but the verification process involved through the engineering departments and building departments and the planning department, it just simply took so much time that it was a very arduous process. One of the examples, one of the conditions of consent was to remove a garage. Well, it was evident by around November of 2018 that there's no way that we're going to meet the requirements for verification for approval for consent. So I requested a delay, if you will, of the garage being destroyed. We had a meeting through the Planning Act. There was no way or no means of being able to grant a delay on that. So the owner destroyed the garage and basically held cars out in the snow for the balance of the winter. As another example of sort of this constant turnaround for information is to take a look at the site triangle issue on Colburn Street. Originally, there was a site triangle that was requested of 7.5 meters at the corner of Colburn and Humberstone Avenue. There's an existing building there, so that means we would have to knock down the corner of the building in order to put in a site triangle. I presented it to the planner that, you know, this is an existing condition. Can we not have a non-compliant use or a non-conforming use criteria used as per the bylaws to overcome this issue? Well, again, through a series of verifications, yes, maybe, no, and so on and so forth, the decision was met. Yeah, let's forego that site triangle at Colburn and Humberstone Avenue. Another issue that became apparent, and to this very day, just last week, I had an email to the engineering department, water service and sewer service. Back in January of 2019, because I was told that there was no existing water and or sewer service to the property, that is the severed property at 156 Glenwood Drive. I verified through records that I purchased through the city, yes, there is water and yes, there is sewer connections to that property. Well, up until last week, you know, there was verifications from the engineering department saying that there is no water and or sewer connections. I went out there with the owner and took pictures, photographs, measurements, and so on, and submitted them through. And I talked through to the engineering department, and I was finally given, oh yes, we have verified that there is the existing services there. So you know what, I don't want to be nasty when I say this, but this is just a comedy of errors that you know, basically went throughout the whole process in trying to get approval. One of the conditions that was imposed through the consent was the site plan approval, which again, through this arduous process, I totally just went over my head in terms of applying for it. And I applied for a building permit prematurely. Well, in the building permit, it was identified that there is a front yard setback issue all of a sudden. Well, that shocked me, because I went through for the consent application and identified very early in the process that Humberstone Avenue between Colburn Street and Glenwood Drive apparently is not a legal street. It's just simply, I don't know, a roadway, I guess. And I kept asking, will this become a problem for the development? Will this become an issue in terms of trying to address any kind of criteria? I was told no, everything was fine. So when I applied for the building permit prematurely and got the answer back that now we have to have a minor variance for the front yard issue, that gave me a bit of a cardiac arrest temporarily. Like I figured, like, well, you know, gosh, when will this comedy of errors end, if you will? And again, I'm not trying to be nasty when I say that. I'm not trying to point fingers at anyone, but I relied on the information from the consent application and the report that went through, which basically said that in consulting with the building department, everything was kosher, everything was fine, in particular of that front yard setback, because we were after 3.2 meters. Now we are told we need 6 meters. So henceforth, we had to go and apply through a minor variance, which was just approved the other day, I guess. So I guess what I'm looking at is that in my original letter to the planner, I stated that the owner has been wronged in the whole process and has basically incurred a lot of delay, expenses, maneuverings in order to find alternate accommodation, make different arrangements, and so on and so forth. What I'm looking for on behalf of the owner is well, call it the refund, call it consideration for not being charged some of the development fees, the consent application costs, the minor variance costs, building permit costs, which have not occurred, and which would be, I guess, assigned to this, even on the site plan control application. So that's what I'm looking at in terms of on behalf of the owner, not as retribution to the city, not as being nasty and pointing, you know, fingers at anyone. What I'm looking at is a fair and equitable resolution on behalf of the owner in respect of costs. So I think I'll end my presentation at this point.
Thank you very much, George. We have 1 minute left, and we have Councillor Carpenter has a question for you. So Councillor Carpenter, please go ahead.
Welcome, George and Melissa. George, the original intent was this application putting in 2018 was to have a house built by June of 2019 in order for I think Melissa to move into, I believe, if I'm not correct. And congratulations on your wedding, Melissa. And that was the idea. That was and the parents, his mother and father, were hopeful to do that. And the garage actually crossed into the severed property. Is that not correct? And we needed to have that garage down, but we didn't want to take the garage down until we had actually approval that we know we were going in the right direction. And this has changed several times and with several reports, and you spent a lot of frustration time, and we've talked many times on this issue. So really, is the cost to Bernansky's is gone up significantly because the cost of building materials has gone up. Is that not correct? And you're looking for something to balance off the frustration and the cost that they've incurred.
Yeah, because of, and again, take inflation out of the picture, but just because of this COVID, all of a sudden building materials have just soared. So that would be an issue that now the owner has to absorb as future costs, as it were. And again, I suppose at this stage of the game, although we have the design drawings and submitted for a building permit and so on, the construction season for this project is gone again. So it won't happen until 2021.
Okay,
So-
Melissa and George, I apologize. We are over our time for delegations, so we will be moving on. We will be discussing this item at 7.2, so it shouldn't take too much time before you get to hear the outcome of that, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. So that brings us to item 7, which is the items for consideration and consent. So we've had delegations for all 3 items that were on tonight's agenda, so there's no need to separate. So Councillor Antosky, please read the motion to place all separated items from all community reports and items for consideration consent not previously voted on the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Motion to approve all items for consideration, items 7.1 and 7.2, separated for discussion purposes, that all items for consideration be separated and be approved.
Thank you. So item 7.1 is the Heritage Registry Project final report. So I will now ask Annie and Christina, who are from the Archaeological Services, Inc., who wrote the report, and Victoria, who is an intermediate planner for the city, to come forward and start your presentation. And just as a reminder, you have 10 minutes inclusive of questions. So please go ahead.
Through the chair, my name is Victoria Coates, and I'm an intermediate planner in long-range planning, and I'm here to present the final report for the Heritage Register project. I just asked that clerk show that on the screen now. Thank you. And I'm also joined by Annie Bea and Christina Martins of ASI, who is our consultant for this project, and they will be available to answer questions tonight. Next slide, please. So starting off with some background, the Ontario Heritage Act requires that municipalities maintain a heritage register, which is an official record of all designated heritage properties in the city. So designated properties have heritage value, which has been determined through extensive research and evaluation, and designated properties are protected from demolition and alteration under the Heritage Act. The Act also allows municipalities to include other properties on the Heritage Register that are not designated but do have heritage value. And these properties have not gone through the same level of research and evaluation as designated properties. So the Act provides listed properties with interim protection from demolition in order to allow the municipality to assess whether to begin the full designation process after a demolition application has been received. Next slide. So in terms of the differences between a designated property and a listed property, designated properties are provided with more protections under the Heritage Act. So a designated property has a bylaw that's registered on title. Heritage permits are required for alterations or renovations to a designated property, and the city gets 90 days to review a demolition application for a designated property. Whereas with listed properties, there is no bylaw on title. There's no heritage permits required for alteration. So you can still put an addition on a building, install new windows, that sort of thing, without needing any additional heritage approvals. But the city does get 60 days to review demolition applications for listed properties. And again, that 60-day time period is intended to allow the municipality time to assess whether to designate a listed property once a demolition application has been received. Next slide. So in accordance with the requirements of the Heritage Act, the city does currently maintain a heritage register of its 216 designated heritage properties. And you can see an excerpt of it here. It's just a list of property addresses with reference to the designation bylaw. It's not publicly available online, and it doesn't include any additional property information, mapping, or photographs. It's also important to note that our current heritage register does not include any listed properties. So it only includes those designated properties, which means that the city is not currently making use of this part of the tool under the Heritage Act.
Next slide. And this brings us to the purpose of the Heritage Register project, which began in 2017, and it's been focused on updating our Heritage Register in two ways. So the first being to identify properties that have heritage value and merit inclusion on the register as listed properties. And that would be in addition to the 216 properties that are already designated and form the Heritage Register. And then the second way has been to develop a new online platform for the Heritage Register that will be interactive and publicly accessible, and it will be a significant improvement to that current list that we maintain as our register. Next slide. So to determine which properties should be recommended for listing on the Heritage Register, the project team focused on reviewing over 9,000 properties on the city's existing heritage inventory using a systematic and rigorous approach that included initial screening, field survey, followed by assessing the material integrity of properties or looking at the physical condition of those properties. And then finally, the properties were evaluated against criteria for determining heritage value. Next slide. As a result of this analysis, of those 9,000 properties that we took a look at, 832 properties are recommended to be listed on the Heritage Register. Now, again, these properties are recommended to be listed on the register, not designated. So their inclusion on the register as listed properties just provides them with interim protection from demolition. There are no other restrictions for property owners. So these 832 properties have been organized into two priority groups. Group A being the first priority with 101 properties, and then Group B being the second priority with 731 properties. Next slide. Group A properties are recommended for immediate listing on the Heritage Register. Again, that's those 101 properties, and that's because these properties are considered to be the strongest candidates for listing. We have already carried out consultation with owners of Group A properties, and that's included an open house in November, as well as providing letters to each owner to notify them that council would be considering a recommendation tonight to list their property on the register. And you see from the planning report, as well as the delegation we had tonight, that we have received some correspondence from property owners, some both in support of this recommendation and then some owners in opposition to this recommendation. However, based on the research and analysis that we completed through this project, staff continues to recommend that these properties be included as listed properties on the register. And again, what we're talking about here is the listing process. It's not to be confused with the heritage designation process, which would require further review and analysis of these properties and additional consultation with the property owners. Next slide. Group B properties are recommended for listing on the register over the next 3 years, and that's in order to allow for sufficient owner consultation, which has not been completed for this group. So since this group is larger with 731 properties, it's recommended that Group B be broken down into smaller sections based on area so that we can complete this consultation in phases, which would be similar to the type of consultation we completed for the Group A property owners. Staff would report back to council after the completion of each consultation phase to seek direction to formally list those specific properties on the Heritage Register. And finally, staff is seeking direction from council to request a proposal from ASI to assist staff with this owner consultation. And that proposal would be presented to council for consideration. ASI's assistance with this phased consultation will really supplement staff resources to complete that listing process within the recommended 3-year timeframe. And meeting that timeframe will ensure that all of the field work and technical data that was compiled for this project will remain current without the need for staff to repeat any of that work. Next slide. Staff are currently developing the new online platform to house the Heritage Register. And this platform will be a map-based system that will allow users to search for a property address, view the locations of all designated properties as well as listed properties if approved by council. And it will also include additional information about properties. So things like the year of construction and whether or not a property is associated with notable people, as well as photographs of each property. And for the designated properties, it will also include their designation bylaw. Next slide. And finally, while the Heritage Register project was largely focused on built heritage resources, through stakeholder consultation with representatives of Six Nations, we also added an archaeology pilot project, recognizing that archaeological resources are also a really important component of Brantford's cultural heritage. So this pilot project was focused on updating the city's archaeological potential mapping, which shows the areas of the city that have the potential to contain archaeological resources. So ASI reviewed this mapping in 2 locations, West Brant and downtown. And the results of this analysis is shown here with the pink areas representing the areas of archaeological potential. So some areas are recommended to be removed from the current mapping as they've been significantly disturbed and it's unlikely they contain archaeological resources. And then there's some areas that are recommended to be added to the mapping as areas of archaeological potential. So it's recommended that the city's mapping be updated to reflect the results of the pilot project as shown here. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation on the final report for the Heritage Register project, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. At this time, I don't see any questions. Oh, Councilor McCurry, please go ahead. We have 1 minute and 10 seconds left.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Victoria, thanks for a good presentation. Could you remind us how the information from the city's heritage inventory migrates into the new database for our listing?
Through the chair, so the heritage inventory will be maintained. So all of that information that's compiled will exist as it currently does. What we're currently developing is a new platform to host the heritage register. So that provides information just for properties that are designated and listed. So it will include some of the same information like architectural style, year of construction, but it'll be in a more standardized format that's easier to access and easier for staff to update.
Excellent. Thanks for that assurance.
Councilor Martin, 20 seconds.
Yeah, just quickly, is there anything that being on the list but not being designated that impacts the property that an owner would not want to be on that list?
Through the chair, a property that's listed on the register, the only restriction is that there is interim protection from demolition. So property owners need to provide the city with 60 days notice before they can demolish a building. And again, that time is to allow the city to evaluate whether or not to proceed with a full designation of the property to prevent demolition.
Is that different than the demolition control area?
Through the chair, the demolition control area applies to residential properties in the sort of older central area of the city. So that's not a tool under the Heritage Act. It's a tool under the Planning Act, and it's intended to protect residential housing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we do actually have an amendment for this item, and that is Councillor Sless. Would you please move the amendment, Councillor Sless?
Yes, I'd be pleased to, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to find it here. That where we are, that clause B of item 7.1 be amended to exclude 1 Webster Street, 74 Dufferin Ave, and 92 Dufferin Ave from the Heritage Register. These are 3 properties. One we heard from this evening, which is SC Johnson. The other 2 are residential homes where the people at 74 and at 92 Dufferin Ave did not want to be part of it and took the time to write a letter indicating such, and were vehemently opposed to being added to the register. So I'm seeking a seconder.
That looks like it's going to be seconded by Councillor Utley.
And if I could just speak very briefly to that, Mr. Chair. I've consistently not forced designation or registration on anybody who's opposed to it. I don't think you can cherry pick. It's somebody's personal property, and to me, we're trampling on rights if we're telling them what we're going to do with their property. So if they don't want it on there, I respect that, and that's why I was prepared to move the amendment, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Utley, followed by Councillor Martin. Councillor Utley, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm concerned about SC Johnson. They're just a solid rock in our community. They've been here for 100 years. They've got no plans to move away from the city. They concern I have is that if corporate wanted them to expand their facility to increase production or for a new product line, that there would be significant days and put that production increase at risk. So I fully support the amendment that Councillor Sluss has tabled. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Utley. Councillor Martin, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not sure that this amendment is needed because being on the list doesn't really add any restrictions to the properties, but I will support it for the same reason that Councillor Sluss indicated, that I will not designate a property against the wishes of a responsible owner. And I think by taking these properties off the list, it gives the owners a little more reassurance that we're not going to designate the property on them and cause untold hardship for them for that. So I'll be supporting the amendment, and I hope it passes. I mean, I was willing to second it, but thankfully Councillor Utley, who is the other ward councillor, beat me to it. I think it's appropriate that the 2 ward councillors move this amendment, but I'll be happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCreary.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be supporting the amendment. However, let me say this. When you look at the 3 buildings that are encompassed in the amendment, not one of them is at risk. They're all loved by the people that live there. And in the case of SC Johnson, the people that work there and manage there. Councillor Martin is correct. It doesn't create an onerous situation for the owner. However, you know, you can hear what SC Johnson is saying, and the registry would have no bearing on their ability to continue to develop their lands. It would only have an impact on the front-facing facade. However, I'm not going to speak at length against this. I'm simply not going to support it, but I can appreciate why it's come forward, and I can understand the concern that the owners have. I think all 3 buildings are safe from any sort of redevelopment, which is really what the register is all about. It's protecting fragile stock, fragile heritage assets, and giving the community and developers a clear idea of what can and cannot be redeveloped.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no other speakers, so we'll call the vote on the amendment.
The amendment to item 7.1, Heritage Register Project, carries on a recorded vote of 10 to 1. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councillor Vanderstelt, Councillor Sluss, Councillor Martin, Councillor Ntoski, Councillor Wall, Mayor Davis, Councillor Utley, Councillor Carpenter, Councillor Van Tilburg, and Councillor Weaver. Members opposed, Councillor McCreary.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. I don't see any speakers for this item as amended, so I'll call the vote on the item.
Item 7.1 as amended carries on a recorded vote of 10 to 1. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Mayor Davis, Councillor Sluss, Councillor Martin, Councillor Ntoski, Councillor Wall, Councillor Van Tilburg, Councillor Carpenter, Councillor McCreary, Councillor Utley, Councillor Weaver, and Mayor Davis. Members opposed, Councillor Vanderstelt.
And that brings us to item 7.2 on our agenda, which is the refund request. Is there any speakers for this item? Seeing none, I'll call the vote on item. Councillor Carpenter, please go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it took me a while to get to this. I remember other councils. Councilor McCreary comes to mind when there was issues within the ward with building and construction delays and planning issues. We have then provided a refund because of the impact we had on those particular owners. And council will be seeing a report coming forward to rectify, these kinds of issues in the city from a report that will be coming forward through a committee. But the Berlanskis have been having a difficult time from day one. The mayor will remember that we were in his office when the building department wanted in order to sever the lot, we had to take the garage down that was over the lot in the wintertime. And Mr. Berlansky just wanted to have the garage until such time as they started construction, because his daughter is a nurse, one of our front lines first responders, and he wanted her to be able to keep her car in the garage in the winter. So the garage had to come down. So the garage did come down. There was a calamity of errors, as was said, or miscommunication, I think is how staff put it. And the Baranskis, who wanted to have that house for their daughter to move in when she was married last June, didn't happen. And the house is still not built. And now we're hearing problems of concerns about Hummerstone Ave maybe not be a street. And if you Google it on Google Maps, it's called Morley Street on a map, but it's really Hummerstone. So there are some issues of whether the street is there. And the other issue was the 6 meter setback. Then it became 6.5. The reports going back and forth to these people to try and build a simple house and sever a lot and build a simple house for their daughter was absolutely horrendous to them. I sat with her father on his back porch with our 6 foot social distancing, and he was completely frustrated with the city, very angry about this process and the miscommunication. And this has cost them. This is going to cost them more money now, and it's going to cost them greatly because we had a miscommunication and our processes are not as clear as they should be. So I would really encourage all members of council. I'm asking you please to support this on behalf of the Baranskis. They need some support, some recognition that the error was made on our part, and the communications back and forth that should have been resolved. A site plan for one lot. I mean, come on, look at the costs. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And we've been arguing this for some time. So could we at least recognize what's happened here to these poor folks and provide them with a refund of money that they paid so they can at least compensate them somehow for the cost they're going to have to endure now when they build this house. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wall.
Just a question for clarification. Has this been amended?
This item has not been amended.
So it says, if I'm just asking for clarification from staff. A says that we're going to refund $566, but B says that we're not going to refund the $7,358.
Is there someone from staff that's going to clarify, please?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Joe Muno, Manager of Development Planning of the city. Staff has made a recommendation to reimburse the fee respecting the minor variance with regards to the miscommunication between staff, but not reimburse the refund respecting the outstanding amount for the consent application and the site plan application and any of the building fees associated with that proposed development.
Okay, Councillor, does that answer your question?
That answers my questions. Okay.
Okay. I see Councillor Carpenter has put his hand up again for a second opportunity. Just before I go to Councillor Carpenter, is there anybody that wants a first time speaking opportunity? I believe we're going to have an amendment coming forward. Councillor Carpenter, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and you're doing a great job. I'd like to amend B that it say at the very end, be supported, and then after that be a period, remove the for the reasons set out in section 6.0 report 2020-311, so that it reads that the request for a refund of consent application at the end, it'll say on behalf of Ms. Melissa Blansky, be supported, period. And then I want to speak to it.
Okay, that looks like it's going to be seconded by your ward mate, Councillor Antosky. And we just changed the screen, so sorry, I can't see who wants to speak to this. Councillor Sless, are you speaking to the amendment?
Actually, I had my hand up in there ahead of the amendment, but I'll speak to the amendment as well. The amendment kind of takes care of the concern that I had. it sounded to me like there was a number of issues, not just the minor variance, but it seemed like the entire process was flawed. And I think minimally, the fees that have been paid that probably shouldn't have been, should be reimbursed. My concern was that when the delegation was made, there was never an amount asked for. And because the compensation goes far beyond these that are listed here. The compensation really is in the cost of the building materials that now it looks like it's going to be 3 years in delay. That's huge amounts of dollars that has been cost to this developer simply because of delays beyond their control. So I can certainly support the amendment that's on the floor. I think that's only fair and it's only reasonable. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, we will. Councilor Carpenter, you want to speak twice on your amendment? That's fine.
I didn't speak to the amendment. I moved it first, but yeah, I just want to say, you know, there was a number of events that took place, and we raised fees in the meantime each year, which caused a higher cost for them as well for fees when it came to applications. So they could have had their applications in a lot sooner had we not had the miscommunication. And I thank Council for their support.
Thank you, Councilor. I don't see any other speakers, so we'll call the vote on the amendment.
Sorry to interject, Mr. Chair. Through you to clerks, I don't know what happened with the Heritage Register vote for 7.1. I did vote yes, but it showed as a no, and I just want the clerk's department to be aware of that.
Thank you for that point, Councillor. We'll make sure that gets corrected.
The amendment to item 7.2, refund request, committee of adjustment consent application, minor variance application, site plan control application, building permit, carries on recorded vote of 10-1. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Mayor Davis, Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Sless, Councillor Antosky, Councillor Wall, Councillor Van Tilburg, Councillor Carpenter, Councillor McCrory, Councillor Utley, Councillor Weaver. Members opposed, Councillor Martin.
Thank you for that, Deputy Clerk. This brings us to resolutions on our agenda tonight. So resolution 8.1 is the Brantford Municipal Golf Privileges. Councillor Utley. So Councillor Utley, would you like to move your resolution, please? Oh, hold on, Councillor. Go ahead, Deputy Clerk.
Through the chair, we still have to vote on the main motion as amended.
As amended. Thank you. Sorry about that, folks. Does anyone wish to speak to the this item, which is 7.2, as amended? Okay, seeing none, we'll call the vote. Oh, Councillor Wall, please go ahead.
It's all right. Okay, sure. Thank you. Through you. Never mind.
Okay, I'll call the vote.
Item 7.2 as amended carries unanimously on a recorded vote. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Mayor Davis, Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Sless, Councillor Martin, Councillor Antosky, Councillor Wall, Councillor Weaver, Councillor Utley, Councillor McCrory, Councillor Carpenter, and Councillor Van Tilburg.
Thank you. So that now brings us, really this time, to resolutions. So we'll go to Councillor Utley. So please move your resolution for 8.1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Sless. That whereas the decision was made by staff to pause playing privileges at golf operations on July 17, 2020, and whereas members of the CPGA designation have playing privileges in North America and can play at most courses at no charge or at a discounted rate. Whereas members and golfers from both courses have voiced their concerns to some elected officials and staff, and whereas COVID-19 has led to a shorter golf season and the need to ensure staff availability for operations and maintenance of both municipal golf courses. And from this point down, Mr. Chair, we have an amendment that states that item 8.1, Bradford Municipal Golf Privileges, be amended by repealing clauses A through E and replaced with the following. A, the playing privileges for golfing staff, playing privileges that were in place prior to July 17, 2020, shall be immediately reinstated for the remainder of the 2020 season. B, the practice of extending playing privileges to family members of golfing staff shall remain suspended until further resolution by council. And C, Parks Department shall, prior to December 31, 2020, provide council with a report whether playing privileges should be continued or amended for the 2021 golfing season, without limiting the generality of the report, shall include the following. 1, the playing privileges practice in place at other golf courses, either private or municipally owned in Southern and Eastern Ontario. 2, the financial impact of playing privileges has on golf operations, actual versus potential. And 3, list of other staff privileges provided by the city to its employees and councillors. Privileges means any form of benefit in excess of that provided in the form of salary, wages, or standard employee benefits. Mr. Chair, it's unfortunate that this happened the way that it did. I don't believe there was any immediate need to make changes until the end of the season. But anyway, we are where we are, and we have to deal with it. So staff have done nothing wrong in this process. What they're doing is what's done at most golf courses across North America. And whether it's right or wrong, we can argue that point. But the fact is, that's a standard practice throughout the golf industry. So I would want to make sure that staff are treated fairly and equitably and respectively in this process. So I'll leave it there for now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Utley. Councillor Antosky, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sorry, the amendment's not in front of us, but there was a clause that spoke to looking at either municipal or privately owned. Can we just, I don't think there's a need for an amendment, because I think the attention may be this, but when we come back with that, can we make sure that it's specified, please, which ones are municipal and which ones are privately owned, rather than a generality that, you know, we've checked both types, please? I don't know if I'm hoping that can just be direction to staff.
You want that for the council meeting on the 28th, I believe? Is that what you're asking for, Councillor?
Yes, yes. So anybody that they're checking with, just to specify whether it's municipally owned or privately owned, please.
Can we just get confirmation? Oh, sorry, Councillor. Can we just get confirmation from city staff that that's going to be available at the council meeting at the end of the month, please?
Through to the council, actually to the chair, just for clarification, the resolution says the end of the year is when we're to report back on this. Is that when you expect this information? Just for clarification.
I'm fine with that.
Yes, we can do that. We can separate the private and public golf courses.
Thank you, Indy.
Anything else, Councillor Antosky?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. I have Councillor Martin, followed by Councillor Sless.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to staff, it's been indicated that staff are also giving free golf to their family members. And I also heard that they've been giving it to friends. Has there been a breakdown as to how many rounds were played by staff and how many were played by family members and friends?
Through you to the chair, I'll ask Brian Hughes to come on as well. But when staff signs up for golf, it's more of a check mark from the computer system to say that it's a staff golf round. It doesn't mention who is actually with that staff member. So right now we know the number of rounds, but we don't know who actually golfed those rounds.
Is there any register that could be checked to see who played?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Brian Hughes, Director of Park Services. What we know, councillors, we know what staff member played, so we can track that and we can track the number of rounds at each course. We don't know which guests they brought with them. We'll know the total number as per the rounds, but we don't know how many members of the public were brought on as guests. We don't have record of that.
Okay. And do we know if other courses allow family members of staff to play for free?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We don't know at this time. I think that will be part of the investigation that we undertake over the next month to determine that and report back to council with all the factors surrounding free golf for both staff and any extension of staff.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask for a separation of Clause A when this comes to a vote. I can support B and C, but I can't support A. And to suggest that we should do this because it's been a past practice. I can remember in the 70s that driving along Colbert and Dalhousie Street, you had to speed to catch all the lights green. They were actually synchronized, but you had to speed to catch them. So that was a practice that, in a sense, was not only enabled, but encouraged by the city because the way the traffic lights were timed. So to suggest that we should do things because it's been a past practice, we should change the speed limit on Colbert and Dalhousie to 70 kilometers an hour. And I don't think there's a member of council that would bring that forward because there isn't enough rope and lampposts around to remedy that situation. So to suggest that we need to change this because of past practice, I think is a spurious argument at best. There's been abuse of what isn't even a policy, it's strictly a practice. And I think staff did the right thing in suspending these privileges until we can get a handle on exactly what's going on and to what extent it's been abused. So until that happens, until we get a report, I can't support giving free golf to any staff member, and especially not their family members. That's why I can support Section B. But I hope that council can see this the same way I do, and we can pass everything but Clause A. But it's going to be interesting to see the vote on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sless.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. In my opinion, nobody did anything wrong. The staff that were golfing for free were doing it because they thought, and rightfully so, that this was past practice. It had always been done. So they were just under the assumption that this was okay. The staff that put a halt to it, again, did nothing wrong. They saw a need for a policy and froze everything until that policy could be developed and suspended everything until that could happen. I think the only thing that kind of went sideways on this whole situation is the fact of the timing. It was discovered and implemented in the middle of a season, and I don't think that was correct. I think this resolution helps to right that wrong, at least a wrong in my opinion, and that we move it to the end of the season, review it, and start next year with a policy, not a practice. We can't operate with practices. I think we need policy. So I'm pleased to support this. I think, as I indicated, I think it rights a wrong that we did. It's not wrong that we are concerned about it. It's wrong, the timing. And if we can review this and have a policy in place for the 2021 season, I think that makes sense to me. And that's why I was pleased to support it and second it. So I would hope everybody would support the entire amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next, I have Councillor Wall, followed by Councillor Vanderstel.
Thank you, Chair Weaver. Through you to staff, can we get clarification, please, on the record, I guess, of right now, before we vote on this, who can golf for free at the golf courses?
Through you, Mr. Chair, currently, Councillor, nobody can golf for free at the golf courses because that's been suspended.
I thought, sorry, volunteers had free golf privileges and
If I can add that, if I can add through the chair, currently volunteers can golf for free, and prior to this pause, the manager and the pros can, and staff can that work at the golf at the two courses.
Sorry, so just because that just got confused. One more time on the record, who can golf for free on the golf courses right now?
So there's, through the, Mr. Chair, there's two answers to your question. One is currently only volunteers can golf for free at the courses. And prior to the pause, volunteers plus all staff at golf that maintain or operate golf could golf for free.
Okay.
Including their family, extended family.
I don't know enough about golf to ask this question and not sound like I don't know enough about golf. We have something called a golf pro. I guess that's somebody who works on the golf course, who's a professional golfer, who helps people learn how to golf. Or like when someone visits our golf course and they're giving a tour, golf is a part of that tour. Is that we have a golf pro, I guess?
Yes, through the chair, yes, we do. We have a golf pro who also acts as the manager of business operations of golf.
So where, sorry, Andy, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Where in this resolution does it state, like, presumably the person whose job it is to play golf and other things gets free golf? Is that in this motion somewhere?
If I could ask the clerk to put the motion back up, if I can answer that question, please.
I need, sorry, I have to clarify what I'm asking. Not free golf when he's not working, free golf when he's working. Or working, yeah, working.
So the resolution here in front of me says that playing privilege for golfing staff will resume back to the how it was prior to the pause. So that includes all staff working at the two courses. We have a bit of an, I don't want to say anything regarding staff, but again, the manager and the pro are one and the same person, whereas other courses, there are two defined roles, two defined people. And that provides for an easier way to distinguish against either staff having free golf or the pro having free golf. With our situation here, we have the same person doing two roles.
You can imagine in my confusion, because if I'm not mistaken, what was said in public was that the golf pro would have to stop in the middle of what they were doing and then go up and pay to play golf during the course of their job. I'm not prepared to support Clause A because I don't think that certain staff should get privileges that other staff aren't getting. But I want to support our golf professional and manager being able to golf during the course of their duties.
So Councillor, that's actually your speaking opportunity at the time. Are you suggesting you're going to move an amendment?
No.
Okay. Next on the speakers list is Councillor Vanderstel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question through you to Brian. Am I correct in assuming that the 675 rounds that were played that we have record of, it doesn't necessarily indicate how many people played those rounds, but they were actually registered as rounds. So if people did a twosome, a trio, or a quartet, 4 people playing a round could also be registered as one round, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillors, I understand that the numbers that were presented are actually the number of people that have golfed, not the number of rounds.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I have no other speakers on the speaking list. So with that, we'll, so just for the clerk, we did ask for a separation of Clause A from the rest of this amendment. Is that, so should we vote on Clause A first then?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, so I see Councillor Utley has put his hand up, as well as Councillor McCreary now. So before we go to the vote, we'll go to Councillor Utley and then Councillor McCreary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify something that Councillor said. There's there's been abuse. There's been no abuse that I'm aware of. And if there is, show me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCreary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm concerned that Clause A has been separated, and I think that if Clause A fails, we have ourselves a problem in that the golf pro will not be able to do his extended job accurately or correctly or in a manner that he's been doing all along. I'm very concerned about that, Mr. Chair. So I think what I'd like to do is add another clause that would speak to the golf pro having his privileges restored. If we could add that as the last clause here. So in case Clause A fails, we'll still at least have been able to do that for the golf pro, and I'd be seeking a seconder on that. And I got a bunch.
You do. So Councillor Vanderstelt had his hand up first.
I did sort of speak to it, Mr. Chair, but I'd just like to have this in place as a stopgap in case Clause A fails. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Martin on the amendment.
Yes, thank you. Through you to staff, I thought I saw somewhere that the pro had access to the course during the course of his duties. Anytime he was acting as pro and being paid as pro, that he could actively golf. I might be mistaken, but I'd like some clarification on that.
Through you, Chair, Mr. Chair, yes, his contract does speak to having rights to be on the course and use the facility and use the golf course as fit for his profession.
So then, in your opinion, this amendment is not necessary then because he already has access to the course?
I would say that the Clause A that speaks to all staff, because he is a manager as well as a pro playing dual duties here, that maybe a separation of an item would be required, or an amendment to that addition, as Councillor McCreary had mentioned, just to separate that role of manager and pro.
So you're suggesting that the amendment that Councillor McCreary has put forward is appropriate?
That would make it clear for
Okay.
us to manage that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Indy. I don't see any other speakers on the amendment, so we'll call the vote. Oh, Chris, please go ahead, Deputy Clerk.
Through the chair, just so I understand this correctly, are you treating this as a friendly amendment or an amendment to the amendment? Because currently we have an amendment on the floor. Just looking for your direction.
I believe it would be an amendment to the amendment, because it is counteractive to what the actual what's before us in the amendment, in the original amendment.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll call the vote on the amendment to the amendment.
Just waiting for Councillor Carpenter's vote. The amendment to the amendment carries on a recorded vote of 10-1. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Mayor Davis, Councillor Vanderstelt, Councillor Sless, Councillor Martin, Councillor Antosky, Councillor Wall, Councillor Van Tilburg, Councillor Carpenter, Councillor McCreary, Councillor Weaver. Members opposed, Councillor Utley.
Thank you. And if we could go back to the other screen so I can see all the speakers. Great. So I don't see any speakers on the amendment on this item as amended. So we'll call the vote. So actually we're separating. So I guess first we're going to vote on Clause A.
Clause A of the amendment as amended carries on a recorded vote of 6-5. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Mayor Davis, Councillor Sless, Councillor Antosky, Councillor Van Tilburg, Councillor Carpenter, and Councillor Utley. Members opposed: Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Weaver, Councillor Martin, Councillor McCrory, and Councillor Wall.
Thank you. And now we will vote on the remainder B, C, and now what is D as well.
Clauses B, C, and D as amended carries unanimously on a recorded vote. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Mayor Davis, Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Sless, Councillor Martin, Councillor Antosky, Councillor Wall, Councillor Weaver, Councillor Utley, Councillor McCrory, Councillor Carpenter, and Councillor Van Tilburg.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. So that is it for resolutions on today's agenda. We do have 2 notices of motion. So I will ask Councillor Vanderstel to read just the title of 9.1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 9.1, future of accommodation and yard space needs post-COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Councillor. And 9.2 is also Councillor Vanderstel. Please go ahead with just the title.
Thanks again, Mr. Chair. And it is 9.2, future site plan of 85 Colburn Street West.
Councillor Weaver?
Yes.
I apologize and I apologize for interrupting. However, with regards to item 8.1, we had an amendment on the floor. We had an amendment to the amendment. We voted on that amendment to the amendment, and then we voted on the amendment as amended with the separation of clauses. However, we still need to vote on the main motion as amended, if that is clear.
Well, of course we do. I apologize for that mistake. So members of council, I do apologize. We will go back up and we will vote on item 7.2 in its entirety now as amended.
I'm just waiting for Councillor McCrory. Item 8.1, Brantford Municipal Golf Privileges carries on a recorded vote of 9-2 as amended. Members of the committee voting in favor as follows: Mayor Davis, Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Sless, Councillor Antosky, Councillor Wall, Councillor Weaver, Councillor Utley, Councillor Carpenter, and Councillor Van Tilburg. Members opposed: Councillor Martin and Councillor McCrory.
Thank you. So all notices of motion have also been presented. So with that, we are adjourned. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job, Chair.
Good job, Mr. Chair.